Chapter 3009 3009 Safety Line. Chapter 3009 3009 Safety Line. 3009 Safety Line. Ling Han leaped up and unleashed his full power of dimension at this instant, forming a formidable shield. Pun! Even though he took the best course of action, he was still struck by Hysteria's tentacle, and immediately sent flying. Fortunately, he flew toward the exit of the realm battlefield. Ling Han bared his teeth. After facing this strike, fractures appeared on all of his hundreds of thousands of low-tier high-level dimensions. They were severely damaged, and it was necessary for him to repair them as soon as possible. Otherwise, it was possible that they would all collapse and disappear. Even though he could already regrow these dimensions now, just how long would it take to nurture these many low-tier high-level dimensions? Moreover, the Genesis world of the last era had completely disappeared already, so where would he find so much energy to extract? Whoosh! Hysteria launched another attack at Ling Han, and Ling Han also unleashed his own power. Pun! Ling Han radiated with a brilliant glow as he was sent tumbling out of the realm battlefield. Hysteria's tentacles flew out after him, yet they were forcefully suppressed by the profound negative realm, which caused their might to fall drastically. Pun! Lin Yulian and 3 other elites were waiting at this exit, and they all unleashed a barrage of attacks at Hysteria. In normal circumstances, they wouldn't have been able to withstand even a single strike from Hysteria. With the help of the profound negative realm, however, a large majority of Hysteria's power was suppressed, allowing them to just barely block its strikes. However, the 4 powerful elites were still sent flying, with their faces becoming pale and their bodies shaking with exertion. Rumble! Thunder furiously rolled across the sky, and it was as if a mysterious power were being wielded. This was the will of the profound negative realm. If Hysteria had been only an ordinary elite, then this will of heaven and earth would have only suppressed it, and not directly targeted it. However, since Hysteria was also a dimension, this was a completely different story altogether. This was a battle between dimensions, so the profound negative realm would naturally unleash its full power. Hysteria didn't attack again, and it lightly waved its tentacles before shrinking back. With a whoosh, it vanished without a trace. Ling Han picked himself up with great difficulty. At the same time, the will of the profound negative realm also started to dissipate. This will barely had any consciousness, and it would only appear for a short while when Hysteria ran over to provoke it. Ling Han possessed a wisp of power that was unique to this world, and he had already cultivated this power into a low-tier high-level dimension. This was a dimension that was directly related to the profound negative realm. Thus, he was also able to sense the fluctuations of the dimension's will. He couldn't help but find this strange. Why did the power of dimension only activate when a dimension was facing a life-threatening danger? Otherwise, with how much dimensions detested heavenly venerates, who could become a heavenly venerate if the dimensions were hell-bent on interfering with them? It felt as if there were an intangible matter transcendent above the regulations that suppressed these dimensions, and forced them to act according to a certain set of rules. There are more regulations above the regulations? Ling Han involuntarily fell into deep thought. Then what force was binding the dimensions to these regulations? If such a force truly existed, then wouldn't it be even more powerful? Chong Yan and the 4 other elites were already at the peak stage of the 7th tier, and they would be unable to take another step forward. Theoretically speaking, they should have already been without desire. However, they still cared so deeply about Feng Wuding. Why was this? In order to exterminate Hysteria? Ling Han naturally wouldn't believe such an answer. Moreover, Chong Yan and the others were definitely scheming something by purposely withholding information from others. What big secret were they hiding? Lin Yulian, Xian Chihu, and the others stood up and flew back to their original positions. Their wounds weren't severe, and they were far better off than Ling Han. There was admiration and apprehension in the 4 supreme prodigies' eyes as they looked at Ling Han. After all, who told Ling Han to kill Feng Wuding? If he was able to kill Feng Wuding, then he would naturally be able to kill them as well. This caused the 4 prodigies to involuntarily raise their guard against him. Ling Han looked at Xian Chihu, and said calmly, "Little Hu, do you dare to attack me?" He was riddled with wounds right now, and his energy levels also appeared to be extremely low. However, he was filled with fighting spirit. Xian Chihu humphed, flicking his sleeve, and saying, "I'll consider whether I should play around with you after your wounds heal. As for right now, I can't be bothered picking on a wounded soldier." Fuck. Since when did he become so upstanding and righteous? Ling Han was astonished. Xian Chihu was actually uttering such words. In the past, who had shamelessly pushed him to carry out the decapitation operation? Who had purposely smeared him and tried to push him toward death? Xian Chihu's actions were indeed in conflict with his actions from before. When Ling Han was attacking Feng Wuding just then, the four supreme prodigies had tried to block him together. However, Ling Han didn't put up any defenses, and this caused the four supreme prodigies to hold back their power lest they accidentally wounded or even killed him. In Ling Han's memory, Xian Chihu shouldn't have been such a kind person. 1. A terrifying power suddenly fluctuated at this moment, and a person walked in from the entrance of the round battlefield. Shatter Mountains. He immediately locked his gaze on Ling Han, and a cold smile faintly tugged at the corners of his lips. What a lucky coincidence! Ling Han was severely wounded right now, so he would definitely lose the ability to heal if Shatter Mountains attacked him with his full strength. As the battle dragged on, Ling Han would definitely become exhausted and eventually fail to maintain his defenses. At that time, he could deliver the killing blow. "Brat, you're dead meat!" Shatter Mountains roared as he charged at Ling Han. "Lord, please show mercy!" Lin Youlian, Wu Haoyang, and Bai Maifan exclaimed as they stepped forward to block Shatter Mountains. To their surprise, Xian Chihu also stepped forward to help. Boom! The four prodigies were no match for Shatter Mountains, and they were all sent flying after just a single exchange. The gulf between the late stage of the 7th tier and the peak stage of the 7th tier was still quite significant. In terms of physique, the four prodigies were more so far inferior to Shatter Mountains. After facing a single strike, their chi and blood became tumultuous and disarrayed, causing them to feel as uncomfortable as could be. Shatter Mountains paid no heed to this. His physique was indestructible, so he continued to charge toward Ling Han after facing a slight delay to deal with the 7th tier attacks. Ling Han replied with an attack of his own. He also activated his near-invincible defense, one that couldn't be broken by anyone apart from Hysteria. Even those at the peak stage of the 7th tier wouldn't be able to penetrate it. However, Ling Han was severely wounded after clashing with Hysteria several times, and the dimensions inside him had also been severely damaged. He desperately needed to heal. Otherwise, if he continued to battle, the fractures on each dimension would continue to grow and eventually cause them to shatter. He couldn't continue like this. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Even more elites arrived at this moment. Chong Yen, Big Dipper, Mysterious Feather, and Half Moon all gazed at Ling Han with cold expressions on their faces. It was as if they were looking at a dead person. Had Feng Wuding's death caused them to go crazy? They were even going to ignore Hysteria now? Ling Han continued to mull over this as he exchanged blows with Shatter Mountains. What was so special about Feng Wuding? Why was he so highly valued by Chong Yen and the others? If their aim was to kill Hysteria, Ling Han would be more powerful than Feng Wuding if they were both at the same cultivation level, so shouldn't they have valued him more? Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Lin Luo and the others also arrived. If Chong Yen and the others valued Feng Wuding, then Lin Luo and the others equally valued Ling Han. He was possibly the only person who could kill Hysteria. "Leave," Lin Luo said to Ling Han. Ling Han was a flashpoint right now, so Chong Yen and the others definitely wouldn't relent if he remained. Ling Han nodded in reply. He also needed time to recover from his wounds. Chapter 30:10 Healing. Chapter 30:10 3010 Healing. 3010 Healing. Ling Han tore open the void and directly left. However, he naturally wouldn't dare to do this in front of Hysteria that would truly be seeking death. Right now, Chong Yen and the others were being blocked by Lin Luo and the others. Thus, once Ling Han entered the void, who could possibly find him? Ling Han left resolutely. He had already achieved his goal of killing Feng Wuding, and he had even killed the sealed emotion Heavenly Venerable and dealt with an old grievance as a bonus. This caused him to feel relaxed and optimistic. He would deal with these 5 old bastards next time. Ling Han took his leave. Once he recovered from his wounds, he naturally wouldn't need to fear Chong Yen and the others. Right now, only hysteria would be able to penetrate his defenses. Whoosh! Ling Han took a few steps through the void before immediately exiting again. He was no longer in the profound negative realm, and he was instead in some medium-level dimension. Ling Han fell out and directly crashed into a lake. His wounds were genuinely severe. After all, he had battled against hysteria head-on. Without becoming a 7th tier, he ultimately couldn't enjoy the benefits of true indestructibility and invincibility. Ling Han sighed with emotion in his mind as he sank to the bottom of the lake. He allowed the lake water to envelop him as he started to heal his wounds. It was extremely troublesome when heavenly venerates became wounded, and this was because they were detested by heaven and earth. In other words, heavenly venerates couldn't draw on the power of heaven and earth to heal their wounds. Fortunately, Ling Han still had a few medicinal great herbs that would help with this process. He ate one after another, and once he finished eating all of them, he finally managed to suppress his wounds from worsening. He could now start to slowly recover. He sat cross-legged on the bottom of the lake. Time flew by. Ling Han didn't exude any power, but he was far too powerful to begin with, being a 5th-tier heavenly venerate whose battle prowess was at the peak stage of the 7th tier. Even if just a drop of his blood entered the lake, it would still be enough to completely transform the lake. After 10,000 years, the creatures in the lake all started to undergo evolution furiously. The initially ordinary fish, shrimp, crabs, and so on all underwent astonishing changes, discovering sentience and embarking on journeys of cultivation. Several million years passed, and all kinds of crustacean warriors and demons now lived in the lake. The most powerful being was a white snake who grew horns and 4 legs and transformed into a flood dragon. If it evolved again, it would be extremely likely that it would transform into a true dragon. At the same time, the vegetation in the lake also evolved at a wild pace. Even the algae that grew on the rocks at the bottom of the lake could be considered as supreme treasures, and there was more so a golden-purple bamboo forest growing above the lake, with the stalks of bamboo reaching 3 kilometers in height. This attracted phoenixes and all kinds of other divine birds. The initially nameless lake gradually started to gain renown, eventually becoming a sacred land for adventurers from all walks of life. Someone might catch a fish, and someone might obtain a blade of seaweed. Regardless, these could all be concocted into saintly medicines that would aid one's cultivation. If one were to sell them, they would become rich in a single day. As the creatures and vegetation in the lake evolved further and further, more and more people also started to visit. Their average strength also grew higher and higher. Finally, a powerful force appeared and occupied the lake for themselves. From then on, no one else was allowed to visit it. This force was called the Azure Sky Sect, and their sect leader was a powerful ascending origin tier elite. After occupying this lake, he obtained many great herbs that allowed his cultivation speed to increase significantly. In just a mere 3 million years, he advanced from the small accomplishment of the ascending origin tier to the great accomplishment of the ascending origin tier. Numerous elites also appeared in the sect, and it could be said that they were flourishing and reaching new heights. The Azure Sky Sect also named this lake the Heavenly Treasure Lake, signifying that it was the heavens bestowing them with these precious treasures. Inside the lake, Ling Han had already recovered from most of his wounds. However, the issue was that the dimensions inside him had been damaged far too severely. He could naturally repair them one by one. However, that would take an unfathomable amount of time. These dimensions were the source of Ling Han's power, but cultivating them and repairing them were both extremely time-consuming tasks. Ling Han did some calculations in his mind would need at least 50 billion years to repair these dimensions. He couldn't wait for this long. After all, Who knew what Chong Yan and the others would do during this time? These old bastards had nothing to worry about now, so Ling Han wouldn't be surprised even if they defected to hysteria and turned around to attack the profound negative realm. Thus, it was necessary for him to heal and leave as soon as possible. The problem was, what would be the point of returning if he didn't recover his strength? To enjoy a show? How can I speed up my recovery process? There were far too many dimensions inside him. These dimensions were indeed powerful, but trying to repair them was also a massive headache. Ling Han racked his brain for ideas. After several million years, he finally came up with a potential solution. He could divide up his consciousness, with each split entering a dimension and transforming into a doppelganger. These doppelgangers would then recover independently, and this would therefore speed up his recovery process by hundreds of thousands of times. If he succeeded, he would be able to fully recover in just 100,000 years. I'll do just this. Ling Han divided up his consciousness and allowed the cells inside him to become independent. They transformed into independent beings, taking on all kinds of shapes and forms. There were humans, fish, birds, rocks, and so on. Ling Han sent these doppelgangers into the void. If they could avoid the storms of energy, there would be boundless fundamental particles for them to absorb. Thus, this was naturally the best place for them to recover. Of course, he definitely couldn't come across hysteria. Otherwise, his doppelgangers would all be obliterated. Such a coincidence most likely wouldn't occur. Ling Han opened his eyes. Since everything was left to his doppelgangers to deal with, there was actually nothing much for him to do. That being the case, it wouldn't be a bad idea for him to go out and take a look. After 100,000 years, he would collect his doppelgangers and return to the profound negative realm. 1. Powerful currents instantly surged through the lake as he opened his eyes, and it was as if it were about to unleash a tsunami. On the surface of the lake. Young mistress, why have such large waves suddenly appeared in the lake? It's almost like there's about to be a tsunami. This was a small boat with two women, one of whom was wearing a white dress and was quietly seated. She appeared flawless and ethereal. The other woman was wearing a long azure dress, and she was currently standing and rowing the boat. She was quite pretty, but she was far inferior to the woman in the white dress. Right now, there was an expression of astonishment on the face of the standing woman. The surface of the lake was rippling with tumultuous waves, causing the small boat to rock back and forth in a violent manner. This was something that had never been encountered before. Even though the small boat looked ordinary, one had to realize that it was actually a rare treasure that had been personally refined by the sect master of the Azure Sky sect. To say nothing of a few waves, it could even withstand the attacks of an ascending origin tier elite for a while. The woman in white pondered for a moment before replying. Perhaps Auntie Bai is about to transform into a true dragon? Really? The woman in azure exclaimed in surprise and delight. If Lord Bai becomes a true dragon, then wouldn't she also become a celestial king? However, the woman in white furrowed her brows. From her understanding, Auntie Bai was still a small way off from evolving into a true dragon. As such, how could she have suddenly taken this step? However, if it wasn't Auntie Bai, then how could they explain these tumultuous waves? Auntie Bai was the sole ruler of the heavenly treasure lake, and she was so powerful that even the young mistress father was extremely apprehensive of her. Apart from Auntie Bai, who else dared to cause trouble in the lake? Boom! Giant waves crashed one after another, forming a whirlpool in the center of the lake. Uncannily, however, not a single one of the many spirits and creatures in the lake appeared. This was only natural. They had all evolved and gained sentience thanks to Ling Han, so they were naturally filled with respect and reverence toward Ling Han's aura. Now that Ling Han had woken up, a single thought of his naturally caused all of the creatures to fall down and prostrate themselves. Who dared to rise to the surface of the lake? Chapter 3011 Benevolent Heart. Chapter 3011 Benevolent Heart. 3011 Benevolent Heart. On the surface of the lake, the woman in white and her maidservant had no option but to grab the sides of the boat to stabilize themselves. Otherwise, they would definitely fall into the water. It was as if they were experiencing a tsunami, and there weren't any thoughts left in their minds. They were simply trying to stop themselves from falling into the lake. After a long time, perhaps it was an epoch, or perhaps it was an instant, the lake suddenly calmed down. "That scared me to death," the woman in azure said as she vigorously patted her chest. She wasn't afraid of being too forceful and squishing her shapely breasts. She looked at the woman in white and asked, "Young mistress, are you okay?" The woman in white nodded in response. Even though they had experienced a wild storm, her expression still remained calm and collected. She gazed at the large lake. From a young age, she would always come here every day and boat around the lake for a while. Now, however, the lake suddenly felt unfamiliar. "Huh!" She suddenly faltered and pointed at some place in the lake. Xian, is that a person over there?" "Young mistress, perhaps you're mistaken?" "How can there be a person there?" the woman in azure replied with a shake of her head. She was quite a relaxed person, and she was already smiling as she said, "Apart from young mistress, the powerful creatures in the heavenly treasure lake won't allow anyone else to travel over the lake. If anyone dares to, they'll immediately be torn to shreds." A few hundred years ago, the seventh elder's son wanted to secretly enter the lake to obtain some treasures. However, he was chopped into pieces. The seventh elder wanted to seek revenge, but the sect leader eventually quashed the matter. "Those who dare to wander into the heavenly treasure lake will die for nothing." The woman in white naturally knew about all this. She pointed at that place again, and said, "Look carefully." The woman in azure finally glanced over again. She was given a huge fright, and she directly flipped over from the side of the boat. Thankfully, the woman in white quickly reached over and caught her falling body. What had she seen? A man. A ghost. There was shock on her face. What in the world was going on? There was actually someone underwater in the middle of the lake? And his eyes were wide open as well. If he wasn't a ghost, then what else could he be? One had to realize that those who dared to enter the lake would all end up in pieces. The only exception was the young mistress standing next to her. However, the two women immediately saw a large number of creatures appearing in the middle of the lake. There were fish spirits, shrimp spirits, crab spirits, and so on. In fact, it seemed like all of the spirits and creatures in the heavenly treasure lake had gathered together. "I'll go and save him," the woman in white said. Before the woman in azure could block her, she immediately dived into the water and started swimming toward the man. She knew that she wouldn't be harmed by the creatures in the lake. However, it was a different story for that man. It appeared as if he had enraged the entire heavenly treasure lake, and he had surprisingly provoked all of the creatures and caused them to gather together. Even she was feeling slightly anxious. "Young mistress!" the woman in azure shouted. This was all she had time to do, and she almost wanted to jump into the lake as well. However, she knew that only her young mistress could travel through the lake without any restrictions. If she dared to enter the lake, she would face certain death. However, she wasn't feeling confident this time, because there were far too many spirits and creatures in the water. Just looking at them was enough to make her head go numb. Ling Han was astonished. He naturally saw the two women in the lake, but at his level, did he need to pay any heed to them? He didn't use any of his power, and he was simply moving with the undulations of the lake. As for all the creatures beneath him, this was very simple. He was the reason behind their sentience and ability to cultivate, so which of them didn't treat him as a god? Now that he was about to leave, these creatures were naturally gathering here to bid farewell. However, Ling Han's aura was far too terrifying, so none of the creatures in the lake dared to say anything. They could only bid farewell to him in silence. Yet, this woman was actually swimming over to save him? Ling Han was slightly touched. This woman was truly a kind soul. She was also extremely brave as well, or else how would she have dared to jump into the lake after seeing an army of fish spirits and other spirits? To say nothing of jumping into the lake to save him, most people would have immediately turned around and fled. The creatures in the lake all wore hostile expressions when they saw the woman in white approach. They felt an innate sense of friendliness toward this woman, and it was because of this that they had allowed her to play in the lake from a young age. They viewed her as a companion. However, now that Linghan was here, it was a completely different matter. This was their ancient ancestor, their origin, their totem. How could they allow him to be desecrated? The woman in white couldn't help but feel stunned. She could naturally feel the killing intent of these lake spirits. She was extremely sensitive toward this kind of aura, and her first instinctual thought was to turn around and flee. However, she glanced at Linghan and gritted her teeth before continuing to dive down. She grabbed Linghan's arm and furiously swam toward the surface of the lake. The lake spirits wanted to attack, but Linghan unleashed a powerful aura, suppressing them and making them not dare to move. Splash! The woman in white resurfaced, and with a leap, she had already landed on the boat. "Young mistress, you scared me to death," the woman in azure said as she furiously patted her chest. This was truly a worrisome sight. If she continued to abuse her chest, it would eventually transform from two towering mountains into a flat plain. The woman in white looked into the lake, only to see the lake spirits stop their advance when they were still 90 meters from the surface. They didn't swim any closer, nor did they scatter. Instead, they all stared at her just like that. This caused her to shiver in apprehension. She had never seen these lake spirits act like this before. "Leave," she said. "Okay," the woman in azure hurriedly replied as she rowed the boat. Only at this moment did the woman in white look toward Linghan. When she had leaped into the small boat, she had also tossed Linghan inside. However, she almost stumbled and tripped when she looked over. This was because Linghan was wearing a calm and carefree expression. In fact, there was even a faint smile on his face. "You almost died, you know that?" she humphed and said. "You're not a disciple of our sect." Linghan shook his head and said, "No, I'm not." Scanning the surroundings with his divine sense, he was able to see everything in the Azure Sky sect, including the movements and speech of everyone. He instantly understood the situation. "How impudent! Not only did you barge into our sect, but you're even coveting our sacred lake," the woman in white chided. Linghan smiled and asked, "Then why did you rescue me? Young mistress has a benevolent heart, and she isn't willing to even step on an ant. Otherwise, if it had been someone else, you would have already been torn into shreds and eaten," the woman in azure interjected. "Oh, then I can jump back into the lake to return this favor," Linghan said. "You've gone crazy!" the woman in white exclaimed. However, she immediately regained her composure and said, "When we get back to shore, immediately leave this place and never return again. Otherwise, you won't be as lucky as today." "She truly is a benevolent person," Linghan said in his mind. This was like a thief entering someone's house and being caught by a pet beast before being able to steal anything. Yet, not only did the owner not turn them in, but she even helped them break free and leave. Such kind people were definitely a rare breed nowadays. She was definitely one of only a few. Linghan cocked his head, and acted as if he were listening to something. After a while he said, "Then let's count this as me owing you a favor. You can look for me if you need my help. I'll naturally help you resolve the problem." Chapter 30:12 3012 Favor. Chapter 30:12 3012 Favor. 3012 Favor. An expression of scorn immediately spread across the woman in azure's face when she heard this, and she said, "Brat, who do you think you are? You were saved by young mistress, yet you're actually saying that you can resolve a problem for her? What a shameless boast!" Linghan simply replied with a faint smile. He didn't try to defend himself, nor did he demonstrate his earth-shattering power. After reaching his level, he would leave many things up to fate. If the woman in white believed him, he would naturally step forward to help her. If she didn't believe him, however, Linghan naturally wouldn't interfere. The woman in white also felt like Linghan was slightly dodgy, so after parking the boat on the shore, she said, "You're on your own now." She retrieved her boat and left with the woman in azure. After taking a few steps, the maidservant even turned around to stick her tongue out at Linghan. Linghan naturally wouldn't pay any heed to this. He slowly wandered around and appreciated the mountains and waters. There was a question in his mind. Since dimensions were sentient, why couldn't they act as they pleased? What power was restricting them? Ling Han observed the mountains and waters, hoping to draw inspiration and enlightenment from them. Regardless of how big the world was, it was ultimately made up of countless mountains and waters. Examining the small to understand the big. It was possible to discover the truth of the world by examining these small details. Ling Han continued to wander around the territory of the Azure Sky sect. He was naturally seen by many people, and he was naturally a new face to all of them as well. However, because of his calm and composed expression, everyone thought that he was a new disciple of one of the elders, and it was because of this that they didn't recognize him. Surprisingly, not a single person thought of him as an intruder. Elsewhere, the woman in white had already returned to her room. Shortly after, a servant walked over. "Young mistress, the Lord is calling for you," the servant said. The woman in white nodded and followed after the servant. It wasn't long before they arrived in a large hall. She curtsied and said, "Greetings, father. You may rise." The woman in white stood up and scanned the surroundings, only to see two other people in addition to her father, Ning Daoan. One of them looked to be in his 40s, and was a sturdily built man. However, the age of an elite couldn't be estimated by their appearance, so it wouldn't be surprising even if he were hundreds of millions of years older than Ning Daoan. The other person was a young man who appeared extremely handsome. However, his eyes appeared slightly sinister, and she immediately developed a bad impression of him. Ning Daoan pointed at the burly middle-aged man and said, "Haixin, this is Han Zhan, Senior Han." Ning Haixin, the woman in white, curtsied at the middle-aged man and said, "Greetings, Senior Han." Han Zhang laughed heartily and remarked, "I've always heard that your daughter was a beautiful woman." "Sure enough, this is the case." Ning Haixin was slightly displeased upon hearing this. Even though this was praise, it was also something that made her feel extremely uncomfortable. It could only be said that Han Zhang was a crude person. Ning Daoan pointed at the young man and introduced, "And this is Lu Yang, Brother Lu. Brother Lu is the fourth son of Celestial King Intang, and he's an extremely talented prodigy who might become even stronger than Lord Intang in the future." Ning Haixin curtsied at Lu Yang and said, "Greetings, Brother Lu." "Please rise, virtuous sister," Lu Yang said. A glimmer flashed in his eyes, and he hurriedly stood up and dashed over in a single step, reaching over to help Ning Haixin up. Ning Haixin took a step back, causing Lu Yang to grab empty air. A hint of disgust rose in her mind. This person was far too audacious, and he actually dared to reach over to take advantage of her? "Haha, it looks like nephew Lu has taken a liking to your daughter," Han Zhang said with hearty laughter. "Brother Ning, when should we set the wedding?" "What?" Ning Haixin was astonished. She was going to get married? Married to this clearly detestable Lu Yang? She looked at her father, hoping that he would immediately refute this suggestion. To her disappointment and dismay, however, he actually started to carefully consider this question. It was clear that he wasn't going to reject this advance. Instead, he was contemplating a good date for their wedding. Her head suddenly felt light, and she almost fainted on the spot. She barely heard what her father said afterward, and her mind was simply a scrambled mess. Only at the end did she hear him reply, "After 3 months, we'll wait for son-in-law Lu Yang to come and pick up the bride." She didn't know how she returned to her room, and it was as if she had lost her soul. The woman in azure hurriedly walked over and asked, "Young mistress, what's wrong?" Ning Haixin was extremely dispirited, and it was with her maidservant's help that she walked to her bed and sat down. She suddenly burst into tears. "Young mistress, what's wrong?" "Don't scare me," the woman in azure said in bewilderment. Why was the young mistress suddenly crying? Ning Haixin didn't reply, and she simply continued to sob. She was filled with grief. She was going to get married to someone, yet she was only notified when they were deciding on the wedding date. Moreover, Lu Yang clearly wasn't a good person. She had an innate ability to tell a good person from a bad person, and she could easily see if someone had ulterior motives or not. She saw lust and contempt radiating from Lu Yang. If she married this man, her life would most definitely become a miserable and bitter one. In fact, she might even die from suffocation. Why was her father betrothing her to this man? After she calmed down, the answer became extremely obvious. Celestial King and Ting. Lu Yang's father was a celestial king, and Ning Daoan was someone with extremely wild ambitions. She wasn't satisfied with remaining at the ascending origin tier. Even though he was powerful, he would still eventually perish one day. However, becoming a celestial king would be different. He would become undying, and he would enjoy a lifespan as long as heaven and earth. Ning Daoan needed to use his daughter to create this opportunity, an opportunity that would give him a chance to become a celestial king, regardless of how small this chance was. However, shouldn't all parents in the world love their children? No, Ning Haixin knew that her father was capable of doing something like this. This was because she had two older brothers who were capable of supporting the Ning clan in the future. As for a daughter, she would eventually have to marry someone one day, so wouldn't it be better to get some benefits out of her marriage? From a young age, Ning Haixin had already known that her father didn't love her very much. He only cared about two things. Firstly, his own cultivation. Secondly, the growth of his two sons. She stopped sobbing, knowing that her father wouldn't change his mind. "Xian Yi, I'm going to leave this place," she said with a resolute expression as she looked up. "Why?" the woman in azure asked, still unaware of the situation. "Father wants to force me into a marriage with someone who I'm completely unfamiliar with. And that person is a rascal," Ning Haixin replied. The woman in azure hesitated for a brief moment before saying, "All right, then let's leave, young mistress." The two women packed some belongings, and they naturally had spatial god tools to hold all their luggage. Others wouldn't be able to notice anything amiss. They walked out of Ning Haixin's room, and they continued to descend the mountain in a calm and composed manner. They didn't want to alert anyone by accident. "Ha! Young mistress, look over there!" the woman in azure suddenly exclaimed as she pointed at the mountain path in front of them. Ning Haixin looked over, and she couldn't help but feel astonished. Wasn't this the man she had rescued from the heavenly treasure lake just then? Hadn't she told him to leave? Why was he still wandering around with such a relaxed and carefree expression? "Do you really think this place is your home?" She wanted to walk over and lecture him, but upon recalling her situation, she could only sigh and pretend that she hadn't seen him. The two women arrived at the foot of the mountain. However, before they could even leave, they heard a distant voice say, "Young mistress, please return now." Chapter 3013 I don't agree. Chapter 3013 I don't agree. 3013 I don't agree. Ning Haixin and the woman in azure were both given a fright. Who was this? They looked over, only to see a hunchbacked elder walking over from behind a stone archway. His hair was white, and he was exuding an aura of age and decay. Ning Haixin's expression instantly changed. This was one of her father's two loyal warriors. His name was Zui, and he had just advanced to the ascending origin tier not long ago. Such a powerful elite naturally wouldn't have come here by coincidence, and it was clear that he was here for just one reason: to keep an eye on her. An intense sense of grief suddenly welled up in her heart. Her father was truly invested in her marriage, and he had even anticipated that she would try to flee beforehand. Because of this, he had specially sent out one of his most powerful warriors to keep an eye on her. "Young mistress, please return," Zui said calmly. There wasn't a hint of emotion in his voice. "Mr. Zui, I want to take a walk outside the mountain," Ning Haixin said, attempting to put up a final resistance. "Sect Master said that young mistress should stay in her room to cultivate for the next few months. You shouldn't do anything that will bring shame to yourself." Zui's words appeared respectful, yet it was clear that he didn't feel an iota of respect toward Ning Haixin. Ning Haixin bit her lip and slowly turned around. It was impossible to resist, especially since she was only a measly severing mundane tier cultivator. How could she possibly rival an ascending origin tier elite? She started to walk back, and tears were already rolling down her cheeks. However, Before she could even take 2 steps, a figure suddenly appeared in her vision. This was the young man who she had rescued from the lake. She suddenly recalled Ling Han's words at this moment, that she could ask him for help if she came across any trouble. She suddenly felt the urge to call out, yet she quickly chuckled at herself in a self-deprecating manner. He had needed her to rescue him, so just how powerful could he be? Could he change her father's decision? Could he defeat Zui? Thus, what was the point of asking him for help? She gradually quickened her pace. Only when she couldn't see Ling Han anymore did she suddenly feel a slight sense of puzzlement. Why did she always see this person no matter where she went? Ling Han watched Ning Haixin quickly walk away. However, he didn't step forward to help her. He would leave everything up to fate. If she believed him, he would naturally help her. If she didn't believe him, however, why would he stick his nose into someone else's business? However, Ling Han's interest in Ning Haixin wasn't simply because she had rescued him once. Instead, he felt a mysterious sense of friendliness toward her, and this was something that made him want to understand her a little more. After Ning Haixin returned to her room, she was immediately placed under strict guard. During this time, both of her older brothers had come to visit her once. However, they didn't care about whether this marriage was right or wrong, and they instead coldly asked her to be a good wife and loving mother. In addition, they reminded her to always remember her family, and to always think about them if there were any benefits to share. This caused Ning Haixin to become even sadder. In the eyes of her family, she was nothing more than a tool that could bring them benefits. There were a few times that she thought of Ling Han, but she would immediately shake her head and dismiss this as a thought of desperation. After all, how could this person help her? 3 months passed by in a flash. The Azure Sky sect hosted a grand wedding, and they invited numerous powerful figures. This was a marriage with a celestial king's son, after all, so those who were invited all felt extremely honored. They all came to attend the wedding. Ning Haixin felt completely hopeless and dejected at this moment, and she numbly allowed the others to help her put on makeup and wear her red veil. With the help of her maidservant, she then arrived at the wedding hall. In order to demonstrate the grandness of the situation, they would hold a wedding here before holding another wedding after returning to the Lu clan. In this sense, the Lu clan was indeed giving the Azure Sky sect a lot of face. Because of this, Ning Daoan wore a beaming smile, appearing as happy as could be. His 2 sons were both dressed formally for the wedding, and they both helped him welcome the guests to the ceremony. After Ning Haixin married into a celestial king clan, the status of her 2 brothers would naturally rise to new heights as well. Meanwhile, Lu Yan lazily sat around, not hurrying about to welcome the attending guests. As the son of a celestial king, he was naturally arrogant and haughty. Thus, it was beneath him to interact with these low-level people. Of course, Celestial King Inteng wouldn't be attending either. He naturally wouldn't condescend himself to attend such an ordinary wedding. "It's almost time, begin the ceremony," Ning Daoan ordered. The musicians immediately started to work, blowing, banging, and strumming their respective instruments, playing delightful tunes on this grand occasion. Ning Haixin was like a soulless puppet as she allowed the others to lead her around. Her heart was already dead. "Not so quick," someone suddenly said. This voice was completely unexpected. "Who is it?" Everyone looked toward the door, only to see a burly man standing there. Strangely, he was actually wearing a round shield on his back. Looking closely, it was as if this round shield were a part of his body. "What's the meaning of this?" Ning Xiuwei, Ning Daolan's second son, immediately roared as he stepped forward, pointing at the burly man. "The meaning is, I don't agree with this marriage," the man replied loudly. "What?" Everyone fell silent, and they all stared at the burly man. Perhaps this person was Ning Haixin's lover? And now that Ning Haixin was about to get married to someone else, he had especially run over to stop the wedding? If this were the case, then he was truly a love-stricken person. "Who are you? And what right do you have to disagree?" Ning Xiuwei asked. The burly man was only at the dividing soul tier, so there was naturally no need for his father or older brother to get involved. Otherwise, they would lose face. He was quite puzzled at the moment. Someone among the guests actually had some kind of intimate relationship with his younger sister? He had never heard about this before. Otherwise, they definitely wouldn't have sent an invitation to this man. Moreover, his younger sister had almost never left the Azure Sky sect before, so how could she have become acquainted with this burly man? The man grinned and said, "I'm Gui Ho, and I've come here with a single aim today to stop the wedding." He pointed at Lu Yang and continued, "This brat isn't worthy of her." Lu Yang immediately stood up, a furious expression on his face. "Fuck! You actually dare to say that I'm not worthy?" If they hadn't been interested in Ning Haixin's unique ability, would he have wanted to marry her? "Son-in-law, don't take this to heart. Let Xiuwei deal with this crude man," Ning Xiuwei said with a smile. On this grand day, he naturally couldn't allow the groom to deal with such problems. Lu Yang nodded and said, "I don't want to see this kind of person." He sat down after saying this, and it was as if he had issued a command. Ning Xiuwei glanced at his father, and after seeing him nod, he immediately waved a hand, and said, "Guards! Shoo this impudent lunatic away!" 2 men immediately stepped forward, and replied, "Understood, second young master." Then, they both bore down on Gui Ho. They were both at the dividing soul tier, and since they had the advantage in numbers, they were naturally confident that they could deal with this man. Gui Ho cracked a grin, appearing extremely calm as he hooked a finger, and said, "Come at me! Leave!" The 2 men roared as they attacked Gui Ho in unison. However, Gui Ho simply spun around. Pun pun! The 2 attacks landed on the shield on his back, instantly shredding his clothes. Strangely, however, it appeared as if this round shield were truly a part of his body. Chapter 3014 Defend. Chapter 3014 3014 Defend. 3014 Defend. Gui Ho wore a calm and innocent smile. He then seized this opportunity to counterattack. Pun pun pun! He launched a barrage of attacks, causing the 2 dividing soul tier cultivators to appear extremely disheveled. Most importantly, the 2 cultivators had never fought against an opponent like this before. Gui Ho didn't need to channel his power to defend, and he simply needed to turn around and use the shield on his back. The thick shield would glow with vein patterns and transform into the most powerful defensive mechanism. The 2 cultivators couldn't breach Gui Ho's defense. Thus, this became an opportunity for Gui Ho to display his might, and he completely suppressed the 2 dividing soul tier cultivators. Ning Daolan's expression involuntarily grew dark. The other elders of the Azure Sky sect also felt extremely ticked off. If they stepped forward, they could crush Gui Ho's defense with a single blow. The problem was, however, that there were so many guests present, so they had to be extremely careful of their status and actions. After all, was there no competent dividing soul tier cultivator in the Azure Sky sect? The battle was intense, and this allowed Ning Haixin to recover a wisp of her senses. She could vaguely make out Gui Ho through the beaded veil hanging down from her crown, and a glimmer involuntarily appeared in her eyes. She couldn't help but say, "Uncle Gui!" Unexpectedly, Gui Ho was able to hear her exclamation as he fought. He grinned and turned around, saying, "Little Ning, Uncle Gui has come to rescue you." This was a lake spirit from the heavenly treasure lake. Gui Ho's true form was that of a large turtle, and even after shifting to the form of a human, he still retained his thick shell. This was his most powerful defense. "They've come to rescue me." Ning Haixin instantly felt the urge to burst into tears. What an ironic situation! Her closest family members were forcing her into misery and despair, while those who were completely unrelated to her were standing up to defend her. However, she was an extremely kind person, so she was unwilling to see others risk their lives for her. She hurriedly said, "Uncle Gui, hurry up and leave!" He was only at the dividing soul tier, so he wouldn't be able to make much of a splash in this place. Instead, he would only lose his life for nothing. "Little Ning, Uncle Gui is only the vanguard. There are still others behind me," he replied as he smiled. Everyone was astonished upon hearing this. There were still reinforcements? Strange. This was clearly the Azure Sky sect, so how could they not react to such a large-scale intrusion? This defense was far too weak, no? However, the members of the Azure Sky sect all exchanged glances before coming to a sudden realization. Some of the elders more so knew that Ning Haixin had been close with the spirits in the lake from a very young age. If others entered the Heavenly Treasure Lake, they would definitely be torn to shreds and killed. However, Ning Haixin could freely boat around the lake. To their surprise, however, Ning Haixin's relationship with the lake spirits was actually this good, so much so that they were willing to step forward to defend her. Ling Han watched on as he stood among the guests. As long as he wished, no one else in the crowd could see him. Gui Ho naturally hadn't been summoned by him. Ling Han hadn't stuck his nose into someone else's business, and he had simply come here on a whim. He would stroll around and take a look here and there, but he certainly wouldn't interfere. This woman was born with a mysterious aura of affinity, one which caused others to want to help her. Even Ling Han was slightly affected by this aura. One had to realize that he was a heavenly venerate. An aura that could affect even heavenly venerate. Just what kind of concept was this? Ling Han was quite curious. Was this a type of physique? Or perhaps there was some kind of hidden secret in her body? The Lu clan was most likely trying to wed her into their clan because they were interested in this ability. Interesting. Mr. Gui, since you're from the Heavenly Treasure Lake, you should know that we've signed an agreement, Ning Xiuwei said as he ordered the two dividing soul tier cultivators to retreat. His tone was far more respectful than before. The Heavenly Treasure Lake was far too important to the Azure Sky sect, so he had no option but to adjust his attitude. Gui Ho laughed heartily and said, "Of course I know about the agreement. However, it's exactly because of this agreement that I need to take Lil Ning with me." He pointed at Ning Haixin and continued, "She's one of us." His loud proclamation caused the rims of Ning Haixin's eyes to go red. Tears involuntarily rolled down her cheeks. However, the others snickered coldly. Was this a joke? Ning Haixin was a member of the Ning clan. Since when had she become a lake spirit from the Heavenly Treasure Lake? Utter nonsense! Ning Xiuwei immediately retorted. Gui Ho shot a sideways glance at Ning Xiuwei and said disdainfully, "Little Ning has grown up drinking water from the Heavenly Treasure Lake, so if she can't be regarded as a member of the Heavenly Treasure Lake, then perhaps you ugly bastard can? What kind of logic is this? Because she drank your water, she's now one of you?" Ning Xiuwei pointed at Gui Ho and stammered, Why you?" After stammering for half a day, he was still unable to offer any retort. Against such an unreasonable turtle, what else could he say? Ning Xiuhong, Ning Haixin's eldest brother, stepped forward and said, "Mr. Gui, are you representing yourself? Or are you representing the Heavenly Treasure Lake?" The difference between the two was immense. If Gui Ho were representing himself, or a small number of spirits from the Heavenly Treasure Lake, then the Azure Sky sect wouldn't need to pay much heed to this. If he was representing the entire Heavenly Treasure Lake, however, then the problem would be much more serious. Gui Ho chuckled and said, "The members of the Heavenly Treasure Lake are naturally as united as can be." In other words, he was representing the Heavenly Treasure Lake. Ning Xiuhong looked toward his father. This wasn't something that he could call the shots for. There was a white snake in the Heavenly Treasure Lake, and this snake had already transformed into a flood dragon long ago. It was extremely likely that it would advance again and evolve into a true dragon. In other words, it'd evolve into a celestial king. However, the Heavenly Treasure Lake had signed an agreement with the Azure Sky sect long ago, both agreeing not to attack each other. At the same time, the Heavenly Treasure Lake would also offer some celestial medicines to the Azure Sky sect each year, and this could be viewed as the price to pay for peace and prosperity. For many years, both parties had coexisted in peace. The Azure Sky sect did indeed want to tear up the agreement and obtain all of the treasures in the lake for themselves, but they didn't dare to do so, because the white snake in the lake was far too powerful. Ning Daoan wasn't confident that he could suppress it. Now that they were allying with the Lu clan, Ning Daoan wanted to ask Celestial King and Ting for help to suppress this white snake. At that time, the Heavenly Treasure Lake would genuinely become a treasured lake of the Azure Sky sect. Start the battle now? Even though the Azure Sky sect had 11 ascending origin tier elites, it was still extremely likely that both sides would suffer huge losses if they fought with the white snake now. Ning Daoan humphed and said, I'm marrying off my own daughter, so do I need anyone else's permission? Boom! His ascending origin tier aura exploded into the surroundings, causing everyone to feel stifled. Gui Ho's aura was also suppressed, and his face instantly became pale. Only after taking 3 or 4 breaths did he finally manage to regain his composure. He took a deep breath and said, Lord Ning, you've graced Lil Ning with life and a good upbringing, and we've also watched her slowly grow up. We're all close relatives. So, whether or not little Ning wants to marry that bastard should be for her to decide. If she's willing, then the Heavenly Treasure Lake won't say another word. If she's unwilling, however, then I'm sorry, but the members of the Heavenly Treasure Lake definitely won't look the other way and allow our companion to be forced into misery. Everyone was stunned upon hearing this. The Heavenly Treasure Lake was genuinely going all out this time. But why? Ning Haixin was just an ordinary girl at the Severing Mundane, so regardless of how beautiful she was, there was still no need for the Heavenly Treasure Lake to go so far for her, right? At this moment, everyone looked at Ning Haixin, waiting for her to speak. Chapter 3015 3015 Arrival of Lake Spirits. Chapter 3015 3015 Arrival of Lake Spirits. 3015 Arrival of Lake Spirits. Lu Yang was about to explode in fury. He was the son of a celestial king, so the fact that he was officially getting married to Ning Haixin was already giving her enough face. Yet, not only was someone causing trouble now, but they were even calling him an ugly bastard. Father-in-law, today's a big day for Haixin and me, he said in a faint voice as he suppressed his anger. However, everyone could hear the displeasure in his voice. Today was his wedding, so he naturally didn't want others to cause trouble. Ning Daoan waved his hand in reply, gesturing for him to be patient. He would definitely deal with everything. He looked at his daughter and asked, Haixin, what do you say? He paused for a moment before stressing, Don't forget, you're my daughter. This was both a reminder and a threat. Sure enough, Ning Haixin involuntarily shuddered when she heard this. In her mind, her father had always been the definition of the word strict. He possessed absolute authority. She subconsciously wanted to obey her father's will. However, her mind shuddered just as she was about to speak. If she obeyed her father, the remaining days of her life would be passed in darkness and misery. She had always been an obedient daughter, and she had never gone against her father for anything. However, a rebellious urge rose in her mind for the very first time. She slowly turned to face Ning Daoan. Her knees buckled, and she kneeled in front of him. I'm grateful for the upbringing that you've given me all these years, she said. She respectfully kowtowed 3 times before continuing. However, marriage is something that will decide my happiness for the rest of my life, and I don't want to sacrifice my future just like this. So, please forgive me, father. Please allow me to act willfully just one time. Ning Daoan's expression involuntarily became dark. He humphed and slammed the table, roaring, Ungrateful wretch! If you dare to take a single step out of this room, then you're not my daughter anymore. Ning Haixin's slender figure shuddered when she heard this. However, she resolutely turned around and walked toward the door. One step after another, her pace gradually quickened as if she were experiencing a transformation in her mind. Very well. Very well, Ning Daoan said with an ice-cold expression. There was a baleful look in his eyes as he gazed at his daughter, and he suddenly lashed out to grab at her. This was the act of an ascending origin tier elite, so was it something that dividing soul tier cultivators could block? Was it something that severing mundane tier cultivators could resist? However, Gui Ho was extremely stubborn, and he really stepped forward to block Ning Daoan's action. This was naturally in vain, and he was forcefully sent flying by Ning Daoan's terrifying power. His shell cracked apart, and he appeared as disheveled as could be. Humph! Ungrateful wretch! Ning Daolan spat coldly. His expression was extremely dark. This had happened before so many people, and it had caused him to lose all his face. This was utterly embarrassing. The guests all smiled coldly. They were from the nearby forces, and they were all as powerful as the Azure Sky sect. However, if the Azure Sky sect managed to ally with the Lu clan, they would quickly rise above the pack. Who dared to provoke a celestial king to force? Now that the wedding had descended into such a farce, how would the Lu clan view the Azure Sky sect in the future? Of course, this was given that the wedding could even continue. Continue! Ning Daolan ordered. A burst of power bore down, preventing Gui Ho from crawling back up. The instruments started playing again, sending cheerful melodies into the surroundings. However, after the farcical scenes just then, things were only cheerful on the surface. In reality, everyone was waiting to witness a fun show. Sure enough, loud rumbles quickly traveled over from outside. One after another, numerous people with all kinds of strange features appeared at the door. There were some with whiskers, some with pincers, some with shrimp tails, and so on and so forth. It was clear that this was an army from the Heavenly Treasure Lake. Old Gui, what happened? The lake spirits exclaimed in shock and anger when they saw Gui Ho being suppressed on the floor. These people dared to attack members of the Heavenly Treasure Lake. Which bastard did this? A shrimp person roared. The guests all wore strange expressions as they looked toward Ning Daolan. He was truly being abused to the face. Ning Daolan's expression grew even darker, and there was incandescent fury boiling in his mind. This had initially been a joyous opportunity to ally with a celestial king tier force. Now, however, all kinds of spirits and monsters were charging over to cause trouble. What would it matter even if he suppressed all of them? They were destined to become a laughingstock. This was destined to bring humiliation to the Lu clan. He looked at Ning Haixin. This was all because of his wretched daughter. If his wretched daughter hadn't become companions with those lake spirits, would they have caused all of this trouble today? Boom! An aura of rage radiated from his body. He had made up his mind. He was going to go on a killing spree today. Since things had already come to this, he would seize the opportunity to dispose of the lake spirits from the Heavenly Treasure Lake. He would then be able to conquer the Heavenly Treasure Lake. You're seeking death. Ning Daolan roared. He resolutely lashed out, launching a palm strike at the group of lake spirits. Old geezer Ning, don't you dare be so impudent. Two figures dashed out with a roar. They stepped forward to block Ning Daolan's attack. Pun pun! There was a violent shudder as Ning Daolan's attack was blocked. Everyone looked over, only to see two fish people whose entire bodies were covered in scales. They were both at the ascending origin tier, but it was clear that they were both weaker than Ning Daolan. After blocking his attack, they both fell back in retreat, with their faces beet red. The wedding hall wasn't protected by a spell formation, so it instantly collapsed from the shock waves of the clash. The guests hurriedly leaped outside, and the smiles on their faces grew even wider. This was truly an entertaining show. Ning Daolan's expression was twisted with indescribable darkness at this moment, and he turned around and commanded, "Elders, advance together and defeat those monsters." Sect leader, that white snake, an elder said in hesitation. They naturally wanted to capture the Heavenly Treasure Lake for themselves as well. However, they had resisted this temptation the entire time because of that powerful white snake. They had no other option. That white snake possessed the bloodline of a true dragon, and this allowed its battle prowess to be far superior compared to those who were at the same cultivation level. If they recklessly started a conflict, it was difficult to predict what the outcome would be. Ning Daolan waved a hand and said, "It's the Heavenly Treasure Lake that's inciting the conflict this time. We have no option but to defend ourselves." "Understood," the elders said, nodding. Indeed! They hadn't provoked the Heavenly Treasure Lake on purpose, and it was instead the Heavenly Treasure Lake that was threatening them first. The ascending origin tier elders all stepped forward. There were 8 of them in total. Combined with Ning Daolan's 2 warriors, Zui and Jiang Feng, This was a team of 11 ascending origin tier elites. Meanwhile, the Heavenly Treasure Lake didn't have anywhere near as many ascending origin tier elites. After all, unlike the Azure Sky sect, they had only started flourishing recently. Moreover, which ascending origin tier elite hadn't cultivated for hundreds of millions of years or even a few billion years. If they engaged in this conflict, the Heavenly Treasure Lake would definitely suffer defeat. It wouldn't be surprising even if they were all killed. Ning Haixin was also being suppressed at this moment, but she still said, "Uncles, please don't sacrifice yourselves for Haixin. It isn't worth it. Haixin will accept her fate. Please return, uncles. Please don't start a battle. Little Ning, there are no cowards in the Heavenly Treasure Lake. We'll definitely rescue you today. Don't worry, don't worry. Our elites still have yet to arrive." The lake spirits from the Heavenly Treasure Lake all spoke to comfort her. They didn't appear flustered at all. Their confidence was naturally coming from the white snake who had already advanced to the consummate level of the ascending origin tier long ago. Moreover, this snake possessed the bloodline of a true dragon, so her battle prowess was formidable enough to suppress everyone at the same cultivation level. Chapter 3016 White Snake. Chapter 3016 White Snake. 3016 White Snake. Ling Han sat there and enjoyed the wine, not showing any signs of wanting to help. His cultivation was far too high, so in his eyes, this kind of conflict was nothing more than a skirmish between children. Thus, it naturally wouldn't astonish him. He wanted to see when Ning Haixin would remember him and asked him for help. Moreover, just how powerful was her affinity. Meanwhile, the Azure Sky sect had already begun the battle. The ascending origin tier elites all unleashed powerful attacks toward the lake spirits from the Heavenly Treasure Lake. The 11 elites, which included Ning Daolan, were all brimming with killing intent. Since the white snake hadn't appeared yet, they would quickly dispose of all the ascending origin tier enemies first. Afterward, they would encircle and attack the white snake. They were confident that the 11 of them would be enough to suppress the snake spirit. Sure enough, the lake spirits from the Heavenly Treasure Lake quickly fell into a disadvantage. Even though they had the numbers, there were only 7 ascending origin tier elites among them. In this sense, they were at an absolute disadvantage. In terms of individual strength, Ning Daolan, who was at the consummate level of the ascending origin tier, was more so able to crush everyone present. Thus, this was an uneven battle that would most likely end soon. The guests were all astonished. Were the lake spirits who had troubled the Azure Sky sect for so long going to be thoroughly dealt with today? If this were the case, then it would be a delightful occasion for the Azure Sky sect. After all, who didn't know that the Heavenly Treasure Lake was renowned for producing all kinds of natural treasures? However, the presence of the lake spirits meant that the Azure Sky sect could only obtain a tiny amount of these treasures each year. Humph! Right at this moment, a cold humph suddenly cut through the air. Everyone looked over, only to see a white shadow slice through the sky like a heavenly dragon. It radiated with an astonishing might. Everyone instantly stopped their attacks. They looked up, and what they saw was a colossal white snake that measured a whopping 30 kilometers in length. There were 2 small horns on its head, and there were also 4 legs on its abdomen. "Is this a true dragon?" someone asked in a quivering voice. The pressure that the white snake exuded was far too immense, and it was as if a celestial king had descended. "No, its horns are too small, and there are only 3 claws on its feet. It can only be regarded as a flood dragon, not a true dragon. But it's already close to becoming a true dragon." The elites from the Azure Sky sect knew that this was the white snake from the Heavenly Treasure Lake. This white snake was extremely powerful, and since it possessed the bloodline of a true dragon, it was very likely that it would become a celestial king in the future. If it weren't for her, the Heavenly Treasure Lake would have become a private property of the Azure Sky sect a long time ago. Now, she had finally appeared, radiating with a boundless might. If the white snake weren't completely focused on cultivation, and if it weren't fond of peace and tranquility, then the Azure Sky sect would have never been able to occupy the Heavenly Treasure Lake. Facing the white snake again, Ning Daoan instantly felt a slight sense of trauma. With a flash, the white snake instantly vanished from the sky. She transformed into a beautiful woman in a white dress, with her curves voluptuous and shapely. Her waist was also thin, and it could genuinely be said to be as thin as a snake's waist. She glanced at Ning Daoan and said, "I want to bring your daughter away. Do you have any objections?" Her voice was filled with a domineering aura. Ning Daolan's aura was immediately suppressed. He initially wanted to shake his head, but he hurriedly pushed away the urge in his mind, and said, "Celestial Maiden Bai, my daughter has already agreed to marry Brother Lu, Celestial King Inteng's son." He was clearly using the Celestial King to suppress the white snake. Even though she was powerful and could crush those at the same cultivation level, what could she do against a mighty Celestial King? However, the white snake was unfazed, and she simply gestured at Ning Haixing. "Come!" How could Ning Haixing walk over? She was completely suppressed by Ning Daoan at this moment. In reality, however, she was only doing this to put pressure on Ning Daoan. Was he going to release his daughter or not? "A measly snake like you dares to act with such arrogance?" Lu Yang exclaimed, finally unable to endure this any longer. "Fuck! Are you people going to let me marry her or not? Are you going to keep jumping out one after another? Is this very fun?" He was the son of a Celestial King. Who dared to provoke a Celestial King? Humph! The white snake was a resolute being, and she didn't utter any nonsense as she directly unleashed a palm strike at Lu Yang. Boom! A formidable power surged forth, carrying with it the projection of a colossal white snake. Ning Daoan hurriedly stepped forward to block this attack. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to shake off the responsibility if something untoward were to happen to Lu Yang here. At that time, what would he say to Celestial King Inteng? Pun! The two attacks collided, transforming into a gust of chaotic wind that swept into the surroundings. The guests instantly started to flee in disarray, afraid that they would be struck by this shock wave. This was a deadly shock wave that could easily kill them. Pun pun pun! As the gust of chaotic wind swept past, the already damaged wedding hall instantly transformed into a pile of debris. Ning Daolan's face was bright red. He did indeed block the attack, but the force of the white snake's strike was so powerful that he felt as if he were about to explode. He couldn't help but feel astounded. After so many years, his strength had naturally improved by a significant amount. However, even though the white snake hadn't advanced to the Celestial King tier yet, the gulf between them had actually grown larger instead of smaller. It was just a single exchange, but he felt pain all over, and it was as if his bones were about to fracture. The white snake humphed and unleashed another palm strike. Boom! The projection of the colossal white snake appeared again. Even though Ning Daoan felt pain all over, he had no option but to step forward and block this strike for Lu Yang again. Pun pun pun! The white snake unleashed 10 palm strikes in quick succession, yet they were all blocked by Ning Daolan. However, his expression was grim at this moment, and his aura was also as chaotic as could be. He was already unable to fight. Otherwise, his body would soon explode. However, the white snake resolutely unleashed another palm strike. This strike would end Lu Yang's life. "Father-in-law, save me!" Lu Yang yelled. This wasn't a strike that he could block. Ning Daoan wanted to help him, but this was clearly something that was beyond his ability. He couldn't sacrifice himself for Lu Yang, could he? Boom! The palm strike surged over. Death was about to befall Lu Yang, yet a hand suddenly reached over from somewhere at this moment, catching the white snake's strike. Sigh. There was a soft sigh, and the person said, "How did my son offend you? Why are you so intent on killing him?" Boundless iridescent light appeared in the sky, amid which there stood a person. There was a ribbon or iridescent light around him, and he looked much like the ruler of heaven and earth at this moment. He was paramount and lofty, and it was as if all beings had to prostrate before him. This was a celestial king. "Father!" Lu Yang exclaimed in delight. He had been harassed for half a day, being called a bastard and being attacked by that white snake. None of them had treated him with respect. However, he had been unable to do anything about this. Now, though, things were different. His father had arrived. Even though Inteng was only a first heaven celestial king, was this not enough to deal with a measly ascending origin tier elite? A solemn expression finally spread across the white snake's face. She hadn't anticipated that Celestial King Inteng would personally come here. What could she do now? Boom! Celestial King Inteng lashed out, grabbing at the white snake. The white snake naturally wouldn't stand there and allow herself to be captured. She immediately reverted to her original form, becoming a colossal white snake that possessed boundless power. With a shake, she could shatter mountains and depress the earth. Chapter 30:17 Help Me. Chapter 30:17 Help Me. 30:17 Help Me. However, regardless of what an ascending origin tier elite did, how could they possibly rival a mighty celestial king? The palm that Celestial King Inteng unleashed continued to magnify, all the way until it grew to 3 million meters in length. It then pressed down, instantly suppressing the white snake on a mountain and preventing her from moving. The gulf in power between them was far too great. Before a celestial king, ascending origin tier elites were but measly ants. In just a single strike, the powerful white snake was imprisoned. This was the power of a paramount celestial king. These were beings who could only be respected and revered. Go on, kill me! Kill me! Lu Yang roared. He had almost been killed by the white snake just then, and this had filled him with rage and frustration. He glowered at the white snake and said, "You were quite beautiful while in human form, so I don't mind toying around with you a little." His words were extremely degrading. Not only was the white snake infuriated, but even the lake spirits from the heavenly treasure lake started to bellow in fury. Ning Haixin was more so filled with self-criticism. If it weren't for her, would the lake spirits have ended up in such a perilous situation? In reality, Celestial King Inteng would have come here to massacre the lake spirits in the heavenly treasure lake even if the white snake hadn't stepped forward to interfere. His goal was naturally the natural treasures in the heavenly treasure lake. Otherwise, why would he have come all this way? He could have simply stayed in the Lu clan. After all, they were going to hold another wedding ceremony there. Are there any more objections? Celestial King Inteng asked in a soft voice. However, this was a voice that was filled with might and dignity, and it was as if a huge boulder were crushing down on everyone's minds. This was a terrible feeling. The lake spirits wanted to speak, yet before the might of a celestial king, they couldn't open their mouths and speak no matter what. You measly spirits and monsters dare to act wantonly before me? Celestial King Inteng said faintly. Pa! A lake spirit was instantly smashed into smithereens. Naive! He pointed elsewhere, and another lake spirit instantly exploded into a cloud of blood. Foolish! Each time he spoke and pointed, a lake spirit would be ruthlessly killed. None of them were able to resist, and they all appeared as fragile as could be. The lake spirits were finally able to speak, yet all they could do was roar and bellow in helplessness. They couldn't change their miserable fates at all. You're still unwilling to yield? Celestial King Inteng asked faintly. Before anyone could reply, he continued to point at them again, killing them one after another. In just a few seconds, another 30 lake spirits died at his hands. Enough! That's enough! Ning Haixin shouted. Please let them go. I'll marry him! However, Celestial King Inteng acted as if he couldn't hear her. He was a mighty celestial king, so how could he degrade himself to make a deal with a measly severing mundane tier cultivator? In his presence, others were only allowed to bow their heads and listen to his commands. Who had the right to haggle with him? Pooh! With a flick of his fingers, another lake spirit transformed into a cloud of blood. Someone, please save me! Ning Haixin yelled in her mind. No matter who it is, I'm willing to pay any price as long as you save everyone. She dazedly looked around, and she suddenly saw an inconceivable sight. The young man who she had rescued from the heavenly treasure lake was calmly sitting in the ruins and sipping wine. Everything had been obliterated, yet a table still stood before him, and there was still a chair under him. He appeared relaxed and carefree as he sipped the wine, and it was as if he were transcendent above this world. Such an uncanny sight should have astonished everyone. However, it was as if none of them could see him, with not a single one of them looking over at him. She suddenly recalled what Ling Han had said before, and she involuntarily felt a strong urge in her mind. "Can you help me?" she asked Ling Han. However, her voice was already hoarse, causing her words to be extremely quiet. It was unable to travel out. Unexpectedly, the young man seemed to hear her, and he nodded and replied in a gentle voice. "Of course." Ling Han stood up and slightly shook his head. He had become tangled in someone else's business again. He hadn't planned to show himself initially. He slowly strolled toward Ning Haixin, and he asked, "How do you want me to help you?" "Huh?" Everyone was stunned when they saw the young man suddenly appear and talk to Ning Haixin. Another person was seeking death? Hadn't he seen the miserable fates of the lake spirits, who had been acquainted with Ning Haixin? They were all being massacred now. Did this person want to die? Perhaps the others didn't recognize Ling Han, but the lake spirits from the heavenly treasure lake were all filled with emotion and anticipation when they saw him appear. None of them knew how powerful Ling Han was, but it was because of him that they had gained sentience. Thus, they could vaguely sense his vast and sea-like power. In their minds, Ling Han was their totem, their god. Their god had come to rescue them. This caused them to be overcome with excitement, so much so that they started to sob. "Just who do you think you are? You dare to interfere?" Ning Xiuwei roared as he jumped forward. He was furious at this moment. This was the Azure Sky sect. Yet these people were treating it as if it were a vegetable market. Was this somewhere where they could act and speak as they pleased? Ling Han glanced at him, and casually made a tapping motion. "Pa!" Ning Xiuwei immediately exploded into a cloud of blood. Everyone was stunned upon seeing this. Fuck! Celestial King Inteng had been killing a lake spirit with each pointing motion just then, not showing an iota of mercy. And now, Ling Han killed Ning Xiuwei with a single pointing motion as well? Was he challenging Celestial King Inteng? Celestial King Inteng's pupils also expanded slightly as he looked at Ling Han. "Be bastard!" Ning Daoan howled in rage after faltering for a brief moment. He cared about his two sons the most, and he had placed far too many hopes on them. Now, however, his second son had been ruthlessly killed by Ling Han. How could he not fly into a rage? "Give me second brother back!" Ning Xiuhong roared as he lunged at Ling Han. "Xiuhong!" Ning Daoan hurriedly exclaimed as he rushed after his son. Ling Han's strength was unfathomable, so he naturally didn't want to see his eldest son be killed as well. Ling Han extended a finger. Pooh! Ning Xiuhong instantly transformed into a sheet of blood. Even though Ning Daoan had lashed out, how could he possibly block the strike of a paramount heavenly venerate? Why you? Ning Daoan spat a mouthful of blood. This wasn't because he had been wounded by Ling Han, but it was instead because he was far too furious and aggrieved. His two sons had been killed just like that. He felt fury, and he felt hatred. "Wretched thing, are you satisfied now?" he bellowed hysterically as he looked at Ning Haixin. Ning Haixin was speechless. This was her father. He hadn't felt a single shred of sympathy as he had pushed her into a fate worse than death, yet he was now feeling such grief and anger after the death of her two older brothers. Would this stark contrast not hurt her even more? "Friend, how should I refer to you?" Celestial King Inteng asked. He didn't attack, and this was because Ling Han had completely ignored Ning Daoan's attack. Even though Ning Daoan was only an ascending origin tier elite, and even though he could also ignore his attacks, the ability to do this could only mean a single thing. This person was also a celestial king. One had to realize that Inteng was only a first heaven celestial king. If Ling Han were also a celestial king, then he would at least be at the same level as him. Thus, Celestial King Inteng had no option but to treat this with utmost caution. Ling Han ignored him, and he made another pointing motion at Ning Daoan. Since Ning Haixin was unable to tell him how to help, he would use his own methods to deal with this situation. No. Pa! Ning Daoan only had time to utter a single word before he was reduced to a cloud of blood by Ling Han. Chapter 3018 Disciple. Chapter 3018 3018 Disciple. 3018 Disciple. Ling Han turned around and looked at Lu Yang. Friend! Teng exclaimed, with his expression changing drastically. If Ling Han wanted to kill members of the Ning clan, then he was free to do so. He could kill as many of them as he wanted. In any case, Teng was only interested in that young girl from the Ning clan. However, Lu Yang was his son. Ling Han didn't spare him so much as a glance as he made another pointing motion. Stop right there! Celestial King Teng roared as he hurriedly dashed forward to block this attack. However, his power instantly rebounded back toward him after it struck Ling Han. He was involuntarily stunned. At which heaven of the Celestial King tier was this young man? His battle prowess was far too terrifying. Pa! Without any surprise, Lu Yang was also killed. Commotion instantly swept through the crowd of guests. Even though Ling Han had killed several people just then, only Ning Daoan had been at the ascending origin tier. However, this time was different. Celestial King Teng had already tried to stop him, yet he had still failed to prevent Ling Han from killing his son. That being the case, just how powerful was this young man? He was done for, Celestial King Teng felt. He had actually come across an even stronger Celestial King. Celestial King Teng inhaled sharply. Even though the death of his son made him feel unbridled fury and an urge to kill someone, he still didn't hesitate for a second as he directly turned around to flee. This person was at least the third heaven Celestial King, and the gulf between them was far too great. Staying here would be the same as seeking death. Ling Han lashed out, making a simple pointing motion. Pa! Celestial King Teng instantly plummeted from the sky, with his aura also falling drastically. His Celestial King tier cultivation was forcefully severed, and he was ruthlessly sent back to the ascending origin tier. He's not dead? Everyone was astonished. Ling Han surprisingly hadn't killed Teng. In fact, severing Teng's Celestial King tier cultivation was far more difficult than simply killing him. However, why had Ling Han chosen this more difficult option? Ling Han didn't speak, and he simply glanced at the white snake. Without anyone suppressing her, the white snake had already soared into the air again. She immediately understood Ling Han's intention, and she resolutely charged at Celestial King Teng. Ling Han was giving her the opportunity to exact revenge. Old bastard, do you dare to battle with me? The white snake roared in fury. She possessed the bloodline of a true dragon, and she could be regarded as invincible at the same cultivation level. However, Teng had suppressed her using his superior cultivation, and this had naturally caused a ball of anger and frustration to well up in her chest. This was especially the case since Teng's son had announced that he wanted to toy with her. Just how humiliating was this? Now that Lu Yang was dead, but Teng was still alive, this revenge would have to be exacted on Lu Yang's father. The colossal white snake swooped down, radiating with an aura at the pinnacle stage of the ascending origin tier. Celestial King Teng didn't dare to ignore this attack, and he gathered all of the power in his body to unleash an attack at the white snake. Pun! The two of them exchanged blows, but it wasn't Teng who was sent flying this time. At the same cultivation level, he was no match for the white snake. The white snake roared, and there was surprisingly the echo of a true dragon's roar in her voice. Her forelegs ruthlessly slashed at Teng. Ascending origin tier was both astonished and furious. He was a celestial king. Regardless of how strong the white snake was, there was no way that she could withstand a single strike of his. However, what could he do now that his cultivation had been severed by Ling Han? He had plummeted back to the ascending origin tier, and to say nothing of suppressing the white snake, he wasn't even able to rival her. However, he refused to stand there and await death. He would fight to the bitter end even if there was the tiniest glimmer of hope. Pun! 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 The two of them battled fiercely. And Teng was indeed worthy of being a celestial king. Even though his cultivation had been severed, he still unleashed all kinds of skillful and mysterious techniques, surprisingly allowing him to block the white snake's attacks time and time again. However, the white snake became increasingly ferocious. There was too much anger pent up inside her, and this transformed into a boundless fighting spirit that she unleashed at her opponent. She continued to unleash dragon roars, and it was clear that the light gathering on her feet was becoming brighter and brighter. After reaching a certain limit, these orbs of light suddenly dimmed. However, another small claw grew from each of her 4 feet. The white snake howled, seemingly in both pain and excitement. Her scales shattered, and the skin on her horns cracked. On each of her 4 feet, a new talon protruded out. 4 claws. 3 claws represented a flood dragon, while 4 claws represented a true dragon. Not only that, but the horns on her head also grew by a significant amount, forming branching tines as well. These were the horns of a dragon. The scales on her body also underwent a transformation, turning from the initial white into a light green color. Facing pressure from Ting and also feeling motivation from her rage, the white snake successfully took this critical step, and advanced to become a true dragon. In fact, she still had room for improvement. As her bloodline became pure and her cultivation advanced further, it was possible for her to become a 5-clawed golden dragon. Boom! Heavenly tribulation befell. After transforming into a true dragon, her cultivation directly soared to the level of celestial kings. The white snake continued to attack Tang as she faced heavenly tribulation. She had an advantage in cultivation now, and a celestial king tier elite facing an ascending origin tier elite was just like a father beating his son. This was a relaxed and carefree experience. Without much effort, she was able to quickly leave Ting in a bloody and miserable state. Everyone was stunned. Who could have imagined such a turn of events? A celestial king had fallen to the ascending origin tier, while an ascending origin tier elite had advanced to become a celestial king. The tables were completely turned. Their eyes were filled with respect and apprehension as they gazed at the white snake. When they looked at Linghan, it was more so as if they were gazing up at a god. So what if his opponent was a celestial king? He could directly sever their cultivation with a single finger. Linghan made a grabbing motion, and countless puddles of blood converged and formed into numerous humanoid shapes. These were the lake spirits that Celestial King and Tang had killed just then. At this moment, they shockingly experienced rebirth. Defying the heavens and reversing death, this was the power of a heavenly venerate. Crack! Deafening thunder and blinding lightning were instantly unleashed by the furious heaven and earth. Reversing death was a big taboo, and this immediately triggered white-hot rage from heaven and earth. Curtains of lightning rained down upon Linghan and the reborn lake spirits. Linghan made a gentle pressing motion, and the miles of raging lightning instantly resided and dissipated. This was merely a medium-level dimension, so how could it possibly rival him? All of the lake spirits fell to their knees and exclaimed, "Lord!" They were all filled with gratitude. Initially, the lake spirits had been slightly dissatisfied with Linghan in their minds. However, Ling clan had destroyed the Ning clan and then severed Celestial King and Teng's cultivation, helping the white snake exact her revenge. Now, he had even revived their dead companions. He was a god! Under the watchful and complicated gazes of everyone, Linghan walked beside Ning Haixin and extended a hand, saying, "Come with me." Before Ning Haixin could even reply, he had already turned around to walk away. Ning Haixin faltered for a moment before hurriedly following after him. The two of them were clearly walking at a slow pace, yet a single step of theirs could cover 5 million kilometers. In just a few steps, they had already vanished from view. What kind of celestial technique is this? She's clearly at the severing mundane tier, so how was she able to disappear in just a few steps? It was definitely that young man's doing. How astonishing! So be it if he can walk as quickly as lightning. However, to bestow this ability upon someone else as well? Just at what heaven is he as a celestial king? Everyone exclaimed in emotion as they tried to estimate Linghan's strength. Linghan strode forward, and after just a few steps, he already arrived at the peak of a towering mountain. Tens of thousands of rays of iridescent light fell over him, illuminating him with an indescribable radiance. "Senior," Ning Haixin said as she kneeled down. Ling Han nodded and said, "From today onward, you're one of my disciples." Ning Haixin faltered upon hearing this. However, she quickly cowed out and said, "Disciple Ning Haixin pays respects to master." Ling Han accepted 9 kowtows from her. Only then did he make a lifting motion and say, "Your master's name is Ling Han, and I'm now going to teach you the indestructible Heaven's Scroll." He tapped Ning Haixin's forehead with his index finger, passing the indestructible Heaven's Scroll to his new disciple. Why did he take Ning Haixin as a disciple? Her aptitude wasn't extraordinary, or else Ning Daoan would have definitely focused his effort on raising her. However, she was born with an innate affinity that made others want to treat her well. This piqued Ling Han's interest, and he wanted to know the reason behind this. After all, this was an affinity that could affect even him. It was quite astonishing. Ning Haixin started to cultivate here, and Ling Han used this time to observe the surrounding mountains and waters. He was still mulling over the same question: what power was restricting the dimensions. Time flew by, and Ning Haixin's cultivation rose slowly but surely. Her cultivation talent was truly unremarkable. If this were Fu Tianqing, 100,000 years would be more than enough for him to advance to the Celestial King tier. However, Ning Haixin only advanced to the 2nd severance. Indeed, she had only advanced 1 minor tier in 100,000 years. However, there was genuinely something special about her. Chapter 3019 Discovery. Chapter 3019 3019 Discovery. 3019 Discovery. Ling Han carefully studied his new disciple. Why did Ning Haixin have such a strong affinity? While Ning Haixin was cultivating, Ling Han was analyzing this disciple. With his strength, it was naturally impossible for Ning Haixin to discover anything off. After so many years, he had to have discovered something. However, this discovery was practically non-existent. That was because he had discovered a small dot of light in the depths of Ning Haixin's mind. It was really very unnoticeable, and he had only discovered it after searching for a very long time. However, he was unable to detect what lay in the depths of the speck of light. This dot of light was extremely fragile. If Ling Han forcefully opened it, it would only immediately explode. Perhaps this would not hurt Ning Haixin, but it might be the key to her having this kind of affinity. Ling Han naturally would not act rashly. More importantly, as Ning Haixin's cultivation level increased, this small dot of light was also growing, and Ling Han discovered that her affinity was also growing stronger. Using himself as a reference, he discovered that Ning Haixin's influence on him was indeed increasing. Of course, this kind of increase was negligible, and the effects on him were also pitifully small, almost trivial. But for her to be able to affect a heavenly venerate that had the cultivation level of a 5th tier, and possessed the battle prowess of a 7th tier, what kind of concept was that? Ling Han was extremely curious. He decided to properly nurture Ning Haixin, and wait for her cultivation level to soar a little higher. At that time, the speck of light would become even larger, as if it was growing healthily. Perhaps he would be able to peek into even more secrets. 100,000 years had passed, and Ling Han believed that those doppelgangers of his should have repaired the dimensions by now. It was time for him to return. "Let's go," he said softly. "Yes, master," Ning Haixin said with a bow. After cultivating by Ling Han's side for so many years, she was increasingly aware of just how unfathomable this master of hers was. Now that she thought about it, though Ling Han had saved her from her suffering, he was also the person who had killed her father and brother. However, she only felt admiration and respect for Ling Han, and did not have the slightest bit of hatred. Ling Han stretched out his hand, and forcibly connected the space of the Heavenly Treasures Lake with this place, forming a spatial passageway. The two of them only took a single step, and had already arrived above the Heavenly Treasures Lake. "Who goes there?" A lake spirit immediately flew out, and when it saw Ling Han and Ning Haixin, it immediately looked excited. He hurriedly knelt down and respectfully kowtowed. Ling Han waved his hand and said, "Rise." "Yes, milord," the lake spirit said respectfully. It was precisely that thick-backed tortoise, Gui Ho. He did not make another sound, but rather tore a rip into space. Instantly, void energy surged out, causing even the skies to change color. The energy storms from the void could reach the might of 6 tiers, at most. This was only a medium-level dimension. Even at its strongest, it was only equivalent to over a dozen 4th tiers, so how could it withstand the energy storm from the void? However, there was another power in the world that surpassed regulations. The rip in space was rapidly recovering, not allowing the energy storm to continue wreaking havoc. "Come back," Ling Han said softly. "Alpha d alpha eta theta epsilon, theta m. Shio, shio, shio." Instantly, multiple figures flew out, pouncing towards him, and fusing into his body one after another. Boom! Ling Han's power instantly skyrocketed endlessly, and his aura also increased madly. The entire heavenly treasure lake was boiling, and the water seemed like it was about to evaporate completely. Roalpha d alpha inu, Lake spirit after lake spirit flew out, and when they saw Ling Han, they immediately knelt down respectfully. Even their hearts were trembling. This kind of great power was really too terrifying. After a short while, all the doppelgangers had returned. Ling Han closed his eyes and sensed for a while, and couldn't help but smile. Very good, all the dimensions had been repaired, and his battle prowess had returned to his prime condition. As long as he didn't encounter hysteria, there would be no one in this world who would be able to hurt a single hair on his head. "Haixin, is there anything that you cannot let go of?" Ling Han asked. "There is nothing that I cannot let go of," Ning Haixin immediately answered. Ling Han nodded. "All right, then we will leave." "Milord!" Right at this moment, a woman in white flew over, and knelt 9 meters away from Ling Han. "I wish to follow milord, and work for you." This was White Snake. 100,000 years had passed, and her cultivation level had also advanced further, reaching 2nd heaven. Her progress was very astonishing. This should be the effect of her bloodline inheritance. Otherwise, her natural talent in cultivation would not have been so strong. Ling Han considered for a moment, and then said, "Fine then. Just follow Haixin, protect her, and give her some guidance." "Yes, master!" White Snake was overjoyed, and hurriedly knelt down to pay respects to Ning Haixin. "Bai Ji pays respects to young mistress." "Auntie Bai you." Ning Haixin was a little at a loss for what to do. Since childhood Auntie Bai had doted on her very much, yet now she was kneeling in front of her and calling her a young mistress, which made her panic. Ling Han waved his hand dismissively. "It's fine." He was one of the strongest heavenly venerates in the world, and Ning Haixin was his disciple. To say nothing of a mere 2nd heaven celestial king, it was normal for even 9th heaven celestial kings to become servants. Even heavenly venerates would have to treat him with respect. Hence, from this moment onwards, this little girl should get used to it. "Yes, master," Ning Haixin said. The lake spirits all looked enviously at White Snake. Though she had become Ling Han's servant, no, Ning Haixin's servant, what kind of existence was Ling Han? As long as there was the slightest bit of relationship, her future prospects would be boundless. Unfortunately, none of them had the courage to open their mouths and say that they wanted to follow Ling Han and become his servants. Ling Han moved, and grabbed both Ning Haixin and White Snake. Then, he tore open the void, and began his interdimensional journey. He didn't want to return to the realm battlefield again. Thus, he took a bit more time, and he once again tore open the void and returned half a month later, appearing in the profound negative realm. Another 9 days later, he returned to his family. "Ling Han!" Everyone was overjoyed. Ling Han would suddenly disappear for several million years at the drop of a hat, which would always worry them. Ling Han asked about Ling Fifan. Fortunately, this brat kept a low profile, and didn't encounter any trouble. Moreover, he had successfully advanced to the 3rd tier, and was currently battling fiercely in the realm battlefield. Ling Han introduced Ning Haixin and White Snake. He did not mention Ning Haixin's special ability, and only casually mentioned that he had taken her as a disciple. Speaking of disciples, he felt his conscience ache a little. In all these years, he had not been able to properly guide them. He began moving, gathering his disciples that were in various places, and even various dimensions. Chen Ruijing, Yin Yongwang, Kang Shuyuan, and Jiang Yefeng were the 4 disciples he had taken in his last life. There was also Ding Ping, Jiao, Fu Tianqing, and Ning Haixin, who were the 4 disciples of his current lifetime. Coincidentally, there just happened to be 4 veteran disciples and 4 newer disciples. Comparatively speaking, the natural talent of his 4 veteran disciples was too weak. Originally, reaching even Genesis tier would have been difficult, but now that they had come to the transcendent dimension, and added with Ling Han's alchemical pills, their limits had also been pushed up considerably. Chapter 30 20 Shock. Chapter 30 3020 Shock. 3020 Shock. Ling Han's veteran disciples were presently in the first heaven of Celestial King tier. Ling Han did not elevate them straight to 9th heaven, but rather had them cultivate slowly, comprehending the various aspects of life. Obtaining abilities that far surpassed one's mental state all of a sudden wasn't a good thing. It could lead to huge problems. Ling Han wanted to let these disciples cultivate their mindsets, and in the future, when he reached 7th tier, and the powers of dimension in his body reached great accomplishment level, who knew, maybe he could help them advance further, break through the restrictions of the Celestial King tier, and advance to the Heavenly Venerable tier. Meanwhile, the strength of his new disciples varied, and the gap among them was extremely wide. The person with the highest accomplishment was Fu Tianqing, who was already in the 4th tier. He was only 1 cultivation level inferior to Ling Han. Next was Jiuyao. He was a 9th heaven celestial king, but breaking through to the heavenly venerable tier was still far off in the horizon. Perhaps there might be no hope for him in this lifetime. The 3rd was Ding Ping, who had just advanced to the 9th heaven. Similarly, it was also as difficult as ascending the heavens for him to become a heavenly venerate. Lastly, it was Ning Haixin. She was only a pitiful 2nd severance, which was still endlessly far from the Celestial King tier, what more heavenly venerable tier. They had to take it slowly. Take for example Little Qing, the Stone Golem, Rabbit, Old Ginseng, and so on. Previously, they had ingested the Celestial King pill before advancing into Celestial King tier, which also removed the possibility of them continuing to improve further. Once Ling Han's physique reached the 7th tier, and became a dimension himself, who knew, he might be able to change the regulations, and allow them to continue advancing. After giving some guidance on the cultivation of his disciples, Ling Han began to take the hands-off approach again, deducing heavenly venerable seals. Currently, his dimensions had already reached the limit of his cultivation level. Thus, he only had to stimulate his cultivation level, and the speed of cultivation would suddenly soar many times over. Hence, Ling Han had enough idle time to deduce heavenly venerable seals. Time flew by. 1,000,000 years had passed, and Ling Han had deduced 3 6th grade seals. He came out of seclusion, and gave some guidance on everyone's cultivation. Then, he went to find Wally. He invited him over to carefully scan Ning Haixin. Wally's eyes glowed green and swept over Ning Haixin's body, making both Ning Haixin and White Snake click their tongues in amazement. "Interesting," Wally said softly. Ling Han was surprised and said, "Strange, you actually are able to say interesting? Have you changed your personality?" Wally had always been indifferent and extremely calm. Even if he was being smashed to pieces by someone, Wally would still rationally and calmly ask, "Why?" instead of angrily stepping forward to fight. So, now that Wally actually murmured that something was interesting, Ling Han felt it was strange. Wally glanced at him, and said coldly, "Don't disturb my work." Right, he was a big shot. Ling Han could only cross his arms over his chest, and stand at the side to wait. Wally finally stopped scanning. He raised his head and looked ahead. His eyes shone again, but this time it was white, forming a human figure. Judging by the curves, this should be a female. Look here, Wally said, pointing at the head of that female figure. There was a spot there that was especially bright. Ling Han nodded. This was Ning Haixin's brain. There was a spot of light in her mind, and it should be the source of her secret. Very interesting. Wally nodded, and then looked towards Ling Han. I have also seen this kind of spot of light in your mind. What? Ling Han's eyes involuntarily focused, and he revealed an expression of surprise. There was also an indescribable throbbing in his heart. Look! Wally's eyes glowed white again, building another human figure. This was a man, and in his head, there was also a spot of light that was extraordinarily bright. This is the holographic image produced from my scan of you the first time I saw you, Wally said. Zoom in. The light in Wally's eyes flickered, and the two bodies instantly disappeared, and in their place, there was a glowing figure. This was the point of light in Ling Han's and Ning Haixin's mind. After being enlarged by who knew how many times, it had become visible to the naked eye. Ling Han compared them carefully, and the shock on his face became even more pronounced. It really was so. Though the two spots of light were slightly different, they seemed to have some kind of indescribable connection. They were like fruits that had sprouted from the same tree, and had a link that could not be severed. What surprised Ling Han even more was the fact that he had never discovered that there was such a spot of light in his body. He was a fifth-tier heavenly venerate. Haixin, have you ever discovered that this speck of light existed in your mind? Ling Han asked Ning Haixin. Ning Haixin shook her head. Never. Then take another look now, Ling Han said. Ning Haixin used her divine sense to scan her mind, but she very quickly shook her head. I didn't find anything. Ling Han stretched out a finger and pointed. Again. He also extended his divine sense over to guide Ning Haixin's divine sense. However, even though he had clearly touched the spot of light, Ning Haixin overlooked it completely. She couldn't see it at all. Could it be that it can't be discovered by oneself? Ling Han had Wally guide him, and similarly found the location of the spot of light in his mind. When one reached his height, if he did not take the initiative to open up his mind, who would be able to penetrate it? However, Wally already said that the spot of light was right here, but Ling Han still didn't see anything. Just as he had guessed, the person who possessed the spot of light could not see it. Strange, this was really too strange. A dignified fifth-tier heavenly venerate actually couldn't detect something that was inside his body? For some reason, Ling Han suddenly recalled the world's will from the last era. That was because very, very long ago, in fact, in his last lifetime, both the world's will and hysteria had already done something to him. Only the two of them possessed unfathomable abilities that even the current Ling Han wouldn't be able to detect, right? Was it the world's will or hysteria? Though the world's will spoke nicely, Ling Han did not believe it. This guy was too secretive, and added with Chong Yen and the other strange actions, Ling Han thought that the world's will definitely had a great secret, or might even be plotting a great conspiracy. He felt a headache coming on. He had not dealt with hysteria yet, and now there was the world's will. Though it should have died, could this really be trusted? He had to stay on guard. Ling Han's heart was ringing with alarm bells. If it were not for the fact that he had unexpectedly encountered Ning Haixin, and had taken her in as his disciple on a whim, and called Wally over, he would probably never have discovered that there was such a thing inside his body. You obviously knew long ago, so why didn't you tell me? Ling Han asked Wally. Wally rolled his eyes and said, Firstly, you didn't ask me. Secondly, I'm not obligated to answer you. Thirdly, I don't know what this thing is either. Telling you without being aware of the situation is against my accuracy and precision traits. Fuck. Ling Han was rendered speechless. This guy actually had his arguments. However, what he was even more surprised about was Wally's facial expression. Since when did this guy roll his eyes? This was too human-like. Though Wally had always maintained a human form, Ling Han had never thought that this guy looked like a human. He had always been wooden, expressionless, and emotionless. Had this guy taken the wrong medicine? Chapter 3021 Granddaughter. Chapter 3021 3021 Granddaughter. 3021 Granddaughter. Did you take the wrong medicine? Ling Han asked directly. You're the one who took the wrong medicine, Wally said disdainfully. Ling Han was even more surprised. This guy actually knew how to bicker, and even knew how to express disdain? This was really bizarre. You evolved again? Ling Han asked. I have developed an emotional system, Wally said seriously. Right then, Ling Han suddenly became interested and said, Why don't you communicate with the large black dog? If Wally also learned the despicable nature of the large black dog, then added with his strictness, what would happen? Interesting. Ling Han was filled with anticipation. After sending Wally off, Ling Han decided to focus on nurturing Ning Haixin so that this disciple would mature as soon as possible. He brought Ning Haixin with him, and traveled all over the mountains and rivers of the profound negative realm. White Snake was also by his side, taking care of Ling Han's diet with great care, and she was playing the role of a teacher for Ning Haixin most of the time. To be honest, Ling Han wasn't a good teacher. Being strong and being able to teach others were two different things. Peace seemed to have returned to the borders. It was clear that Chong Yen and the others had abandoned their posts and quit, but the situation on the front lines was still tense. Hysteria itself was becoming fiercer and fiercer, causing those on the main battlefield to retreat repeatedly. At present, the main battlefield was not something that Ling Han could interfere in. Previously, he had only been there for a short while, and he had almost been killed. Meanwhile, there were 4 great prodigies like Xian Chihu and the others overseeing the subsidiary battlefield. Though it did not seem to be all that optimistic, the situation was much better than the main battlefield. Hence, even if Ling Han went, he would not be of much help, unless he managed to become a 7th tier. He made good use of the time. While he was training his disciples, he himself was also cultivating, striving to reach the peak stage of the 5th tier and advance to 6th tier as soon as possible. In this way, he was sure that his defenses would be slightly stronger, and if he faced hysteria again, he would not be so vulnerable as he was now. That was hysteria. Just how strong was it? Ling Han believed that if hysteria was allowed to swallow a few dimensions, perhaps its power would be comparable to the overwhelming attack from the entire Genesis world, which was capable of shattering even the divine sense of a 7th tier. Perhaps, it was precisely because of their own safety considerations that Chong Yen and the others actively resisted hysteria, because this was related to their precious lives. Very soon, 300,000 years had passed. Ning Haixin had indeed improved, but she had only reached the 5th severance. On the other hand, with Ling Han's guidance, White Snake had already reached 5th heaven. In 300,000 years, she had advanced a total of 3 cultivation levels. This was very astonishing, but just look at Ning Haixin. White Snake, as a celestial king, had advanced 3 cultivation levels, while she had only advanced 3 minor levels in severing mundane tier. In comparison, her rate of cultivation was so slow that it was practically a tragic sight. This rendered White Snake speechless. The cultivation resources that Ning Haixin received were at least 10 times those of hers, but treasures that could allow a celestial king to advance a few steps further actually had such little effect. Thankfully, she very much doted on Ning Haixin. Otherwise, she would definitely be cursing internally. Why had Ling Han taken in such a stupid disciple? Another 100,000 years passed, and Ning Haixin had advanced to the dividing soul tier. Ordinarily, severing mundane tiers would need 100,000 years to advance another step, and then dividing soul tiers would need at least 1,000,000 years to advance to the next level. But what surprised Ling Han was that Ning Haixin's rate of cultivation did not slow down at all. It seemed as if her speed could already be no slower, so that was that. Every step she took was very firm. Ling Han was already beginning to search for a new dimension that had been created from the collision of the 2 dimensions, and when Ning Haixin advanced to the 9th heaven, he would plant it into her body. Of course, if Ning Haixin could be like him, plucking the power of dimension to form dimensions, Ling Han would also be willing to let her take this path. 1,000,000 years, 2,000,000 years, 3,000,000 years. Ning Haixin had steadily advanced into Celestial King tier. This caused White Snake to feel surprised. That was because it had taken her more than 3,000,000 years to become a Celestial King, and Ning Haixin had already caught up to her in terms of cultivation level. Ling Han kept his attention on the spot of light in Ning Haixin's mind all this while, and as her cultivation level continuously advanced, this spot of light was also slowly growing in size. He could see it even more clearly than before. There were multiple patterns of light on it, and they were constantly changing, as if they were evolving into something. However, though the ball of light wasn't particularly blinding, it was extremely blurry. Ling Han decided that when Ning Haixin was slightly stronger, he would then explore the secret of this ball of light. Only then would he be able to ensure that he would not hurt her. Every 100,000 years, Ning Haixin's cultivation level would improve by a notch. The Celestial King tier only had 9 heavens. Thus, after only 800,000 years, Ning Haixin had already reached 9th heaven, and White Snake was still only at 7th heaven, which stunned her, and caused her to be more impressed with Ling Han's insight. See, so that was why Ning Haixin could be his disciple, while she could only be a servant. When Ning Haixin advanced to peak stage 9th heaven, Ling Han would bring her on an interdimensional journey so she could prepare to walk her own path. If she could not successfully take her own path, then he would have long since prepared himself, and he could plant a new dimension into her body. Coincidentally, Ling Shi and Fu Tianxing finally had a descendant, giving birth to a little princess. Ling Han was overjoyed upon seeing this, and decided to postpone their journey. He returned. He wanted to see this granddaughter of his immediately. As expected, though the little girl had just been born, she already had the makings of an exceptional beauty. In the future, she would definitely be a bewitching beauty that could bring ruin to the nation and to the people. Though Ling Han's strength was close to invincible, and he was also her grandfather, whether it was Ling Shi, Fu Tianxing, the Empress, or the others, or even Ling Dongxing and his wife, they all firmly objected to Ling Han naming the little girl. It couldn't be helped. Looking at the creatures by his side, Little Qing and Small Rock, what kind of names were these? Thus, Ling Han's naming rights were mercilessly stripped from him. Even his protests were ineffective. How could it be that he would be able to suppress all of his family? In the end, the little girl was named Fu Siken, and her nickname was Qinshin. Though Ling Han was displeased for a while, he was still very soon overjoyed. He hugged the little girl, unwilling to put her down. Little Qinshin had inherited the bloodline of her parents, and was born a celestial king. Her starting point was astonishingly high, and her path of cultivation was incredibly smooth. Merely 100 years later, she had reached 9th heaven. This was too fast, and Ling Han wasn't happy about this. Instead, he felt that the little girl hadn't tempered her foundations enough, with a lot of cultivation levels that she hadn't studied and experienced deeply yet, and had advanced in a flash. After advancing to the Heavenly Venerable tier, the aftereffects would definitely erupt. Thus, Ling Han decided to bring little Qinshin along. Ning Haixin's reason was to break through to the pseudo-Heavenly Venerable tier, while the reason for Qinshin was for her to experience many lifetimes and cultivate her heart. With Ling Han by her side, Fu Tianxing and Ling Shi naturally had nothing to worry about. "Father, you can't lead Qinshin astray," Ling Shi warned. Ling Han rolled his eyes. In the past, this daughter of his had been so obedient, and now, sigh. He set off with the 2 girls, and began to travel from dimension to dimension. What surprised Ling Han was the fact that Ning Haixin soon proved that she could not take the same path as Ling Han and nurture endless powers of dimension in her body. Strange. Ling Han was exasperated, so he could only plant a dimension that he had prepared long ago into his disciple's body. Chapter 3022 Secret of Life. Chapter 3022 Secret of Life. 3022 Secret of Life. Ling Han did not return. Instead, he continued to travel around with the 2 girls. He had 2 purposes for this trip. The first was to help Ning Haixin advance to the pseudo-Heavenly Venerable Tai, and the second was to help little Qianqian cultivate her heart through experiencing many lifetimes. This little girl's cultivation speed was too fast, and needed to be suppressed a bit. She definitely could not immediately advance to the heavenly venerable tier. Time passed quickly, and little Qianqian was also cultivating her heart in the mortal world. She was originally a little princess that was cherished dearly, but Ling Han deliberately caused trouble for her, suppressing her cultivation level, and allowing her to see how dangerous the human heart could be and the chaos of the world. While still maintaining her childish nature, the little girl's spirit was also rapidly growing, and she knew how to protect herself. Ning Haixin's cultivation speed, on the other hand, could not be suppressed no matter what. 100,000 years later, she steadily advanced to the pseudo-heavenly venerable tier. Ling Han still wanted to open up a second space in her dantian to accommodate a second dimension, but he was soon stunned because he was unable to do so. It was not that he was not capable enough, but rather that a second space could not be opened in Ning Haixin's dantian at all. This female disciple was filled with secrets. At this time, the advancement of Ning Haixin finally slowed down. After all, this was heavenly venerable tier. If she could manage to cross over to the next cultivation level with another 100,000 years, that would be too terrifying. They had both come with little Qian so she could temper her heart. Though this little girl's cultivation level was frighteningly high, just like Ling Shi, the rate of her physical growth was extraordinarily slow. So many years had passed, and she only looked to be about 5 or 6 years old. Ling Han, on the other hand, hoped that the little girl would grow up a little slower so that she could enjoy a carefree life even more. Unfortunately, celestial kings already had an unlimited lifespan. The little girl was destined to grow up and possess an incredibly long life. At this moment, Ling Han was actually feeling fortunate. Thankfully, Ling Shi had found Fu Tianqing. Otherwise, it would be too boring to walk alone on the path of immortality. After walking for another several 100,000 years, Ling Han brought the two girls back to the profound negative realm. He wanted little Qianqian to reunite with her parents. After all, no matter how slow her growth was, she would still grow up bit by bit. He could not allow Ling Shi and the others to be absent from little Qianqian's growth for too long. He had already helped to lay an incredibly firm foundation for little Qianqian, so there was no need for him to worry about the remaining matters. Ling Shi and Fu Tianqing would take care of the rest. Ling Han still decided to properly nurture Ning Haixin. This should be his last disciple. Another 300,000 years later, Ning Haixin advanced into the heavenly venerable tier. This was something that she definitely wouldn't have thought of when she had been at the Azure Sky sect. Though she was beautiful, and had an indescribable affinity, her natural talent in cultivation was really not very high. Otherwise, she would not have been treated as an object to be used in a political marriage by Ning Daoan. However, it just so happened that she did not seem to have any concept of barriers to her cultivation level. She advanced triumphantly the whole way, and others could only gasp in amazement. Since Ning Haixin had become a heavenly venerate, Ling Han's courage increased considerably. He once again used his divine sense to enter Ning Haixin's mind to study that spot of light. After her advancing into the heavenly venerable tier, this point of light had become considerably larger. If the mind was really seen as a great ocean, then this spot of light should be about the size of a fist by now. Actually, it was still pitifully small, but compared to the beginning, it had already grown a few 100 million times. Ling Han discovered that this ball of light had become considerably tougher. If it could have been said that it would have shattered at the slightest touch previously, now it could at least endure a little bit of power. Ling Han carefully studied the orb of light. Now, he could finally explore it. However, even though the orb of light was constantly changing, it was still a complete object. There was absolutely no opening through which one could enter and observe the detailed situation inside. Ling Han frowned. Was there still nothing he could do? A thought flashed in his mind, and he said, Haixin, use your divine sense to touch the ball of light in my mind. Yes, master, Ning Haixin said respectfully. She also used her divine sense to probe into Ling Han's mind. Very soon, she located the ball of light, and this was something that Ling Han could not do. Those with light orbs couldn't sense its existence in themselves. When Ning Haixing reached out with her divine sense, one, the two of them trembled at the same time, and a fierce reaction rose up in them. Ling Han shockingly discovered that with a ripple in his mind, he saw a ball of light. That was his own ball of light. Wasn't it something that he himself could not see? Could it be that if two people who possessed light orbs touched each other's light orbs, it would create some kind of special resonance? Ling Han had no time to care about this now. He could finally sense his own light orb. This meant that he could possibly unravel the secret of the light orb. Because this was a part of him, and he knew the severity of the matter, he could not possibly wound himself. He analyzed it carefully, and slowly entered into that sphere of light. This ball of light looked very small, but there were actually innumerable layers. Even after spending at least a few years, Ling Han had only progressed halfway. And Ning Haixing was even slower. The strength of her divine sense was naturally far from being comparable to Ling Han's. Ling Han was extremely patient. Since he had already waited for tens of millions of years, he did not mind spending a few more years' time. His progress was not fast, but the advantage was that it was steady. As long as this kind of resonance was still present, and he could continue to sense the light sphere, he would eventually be able to find out the secret hidden within. Over another dozen years later, Ling Han peeled apart the layers, and entered into the depths of the light sphere. His mind glowed, exuding an endless brilliance. Multiple pieces of information circulated in Ling Han's mind, but they were extremely obscure and incomprehensible. Ling Han was not hasty. He had a lot of time. He did not withdraw his divine sense, but rather helped Ning Haixing to continue unraveling the light sphere. In the blink of an eye, another 300 years had passed. Ning Haixing finally broke through the light orb as well. Hence, Ling Han withdrew, and began to fully comprehend the secrets of the information he had gained. Ling Han channeled the regulations of time. This was ineffective on his physical body, but could effectively affect his divine sense, speeding up the process of his comprehension. 4,000 years passed, and Ling Han's eyes suddenly snapped open, revealing an expression of extreme shock. He saw the profound secrets of life. What? He found this inconceivable. The mystery of life was actually hidden in his mind. Wait, no! Ling Han suddenly stood up. He had discovered what he had previously overlooked. The World's Will had said that it had helped Ling Han mend his flaws, allowing Ling Han to possess the ability to develop new dimensions, as well as the ability to upgrade dimensions to transcendent level. One day, his body would eventually become a second Genesis world. However, Ling Han had now discovered that it had either forgotten, or had deliberately left out, a key point, an incredibly crucial point. Life. Without life, the Genesis world would only be reduced to ruins, just like how the Genesis world of the last era had been. In truth, there were still remnants of the various dimensions, yet they could only walk towards death. Why was it like this? That was because all dimensions had life. Without life, just the cold heaven and earth could not nurture life and turn into a world of its own. Ling Han pondered for a moment. Had the World's Will deliberately forgotten this important point? This was one of the three key factors, so how could it possibly forget? This was really becoming more and more interesting. Chapter 3023 3023 Secret Code. Chapter 3023 3023 Secret Code. 3023 Secret Code. That World's Will had spoken vaguely, and hidden a very deep secret. Ling Han had never truly believed it. In fact, was that really the World's Will, or rather, did such a being exist? Ling Han was given a fright. It called itself the World's Will, so it really was the World's Will? It had only shown him a fragment of history, and this was enough to prove its identity. Under the name of the World's Will, the words that it said were naturally filled with justice and righteousness, so others would believe it without a doubt. Hold on, the World's Will said that it had modified me, allowing me to have the ability to create new dimensions and improve the dimension to transcendent level. Is this the ability it bestowed on me, or has it released some of the life energy in this light sphere of mine? Life is the strongest power in the world, and is the cornerstone of the world. This kind of power can allow me to have the ability to evolve dimensions, and it would be very normal for me to even advance a dimension to the transcendent level. Life itself should have the ability to evolve in the first place. So, has it bestowed this ability on me, or has it only unlocked this ability of mine? But no matter what, the world's will is not so simple. In fact, I suspect that it has not truly disappeared. It's really chaotic. I haven't dealt with hysteria yet, and here comes another extermination, and then a so-called world's will. Ling Han tried to decipher the information in his mind. If he could obtain the secret code of life, he would be able to create within the void, and evolve his own dimensions into a true world. Hold on, was this the eighth power? The eighth fundamental power was yin and yang, life and death, chaos and order. Essentially, it was a kind of conflict. If Ling Han possessed the power of life, the corresponding power would be the power of death. And the power of death was too simple. What Heavenly Venerate did not have the power to destroy all life. If he could grasp the eighth fundamental power, he would truly possess the ability to destroy hysteria. Ling Han analyzed the information inside his body continuously, but there was nothing he could do. The information was too fragmented, and could not be deciphered at all. A thought flashed in his mind. Then what did Ning Haixin obtain? He communicated with Ning Haixin, but the latter had completely no idea what the information in her mind was. Thankfully, she could show it, and allow Ling Han to view it. Both of them possessed that mysterious orb of light, which gave them the possibility of communicating with one another. Ling Han obtained all the information she had gained. After studying carefully, he discovered that what she possessed was also the secret code of life. It was also fragmented and extremely mysterious. Ling Han studied it carefully, trying to piece the information together. However, he couldn't. It was as if this was only a part of a massive puzzle, and there were still too many parts missing. As a result, he was unable to piece together a complete picture. However, he still managed to piece them together a bit, causing him to experience appreciation and enter into a state of deep meditation. His eyes snapped open before showing an astounded expression. His surroundings had changed greatly. Just how many years have passed? Ling Han looked around. Ning Haixin had also disappeared. She probably saw that he had been cultivating in seclusion all this while, so she left first. Forget it, let's not worry about this first. Ling Han stretched out his hand and spread open his palm. A blade of grass immediately grew from his palm, rapidly growing and then blooming, bearing seeds, and wilting with age. In the past, he had also been able to do this, but he required a seed. He had only catalyzed the growth process of this life form. But it was different now. He had created something out of thin air, like he was a creator. Hysteria could do this. It had manifested as a dimension, and could even create 6th-tier heavenly venerates. In comparison, Ling Han was far inferior. Ling Han could only create the most ordinary weed, which was completely worthless. To say nothing of heavenly venerates, he could not even create a creature with intelligence. But the crux of the matter was that he had taken the first step. This was an ability that he had obtained after deciphering some of the secret code of life. Ling Han pondered for a moment before muttering, "The secret code of life that I obtained isn't complete. Moreover, since Ning Haixin and I have appeared, perhaps there are even more people who possess this kind of orb of light in their minds. Perhaps the combination of the secret codes of life of 10, or even 100 people would be needed to truly grasp the ability of creation within the void. However, there are more than millions and millions of living beings in the world, and this is hidden in the depths of the mind. If I were to search them one by one, the speed of my search could not compare to the reproduction of life at all. In other words, even if I possessed an endless lifespan, this task would never be completed. Moreover, the person who possesses the light orb doesn't know himself, and the mind itself is extremely important, so it's impossible that one would open it up for the viewing of others. Even if I offer an astronomical bounty, it's useless. This is really difficult to deal with. Forget it, let's not worry about this first." He'd think more about it when he got back. Ling Han returned to peaceful Leaf City. After reuniting with everyone, only then did he know that a whole 3 billion years had passed in this period of seclusion. No wonder the surrounding environment had changed so much. 3 billion years was enough time to turn the seas into land and change everything completely. "Grandfather!" A pretty little girl called out to Ling Han daintily. She was really too beautiful. Ling Han faltered. "Little Chin-Chin? I'm already an adult now, not little Chin-Chin," the young girl said childishly. Ling Han laughed loudly. "No matter how big you are still my precious granddaughter, little Chin-Chin. Little Chin-Chin." The family reunited, so it was naturally extremely lively. The Ling clan hosted a grand gathering to welcome Ling Han's return. After this, Ling Han didn't plan to run around anywhere else. There were only 2 locations he would go. The first was peaceful Leaf City, and the second was the realm battlefield, where everyone was duty-bound to shoulder the responsibility of the survival of their world, especially when he was so powerful. 3 billion years had passed, and Ling Han had also cultivated to the peak stage of the 5th tier. Without so many dimensions in his body holding him back, his cultivation speed was naturally fast. How many heavenly venerable seals did he have now? And how many combination seals did he have? As he prepared to break through to the 6th tier, he was also deducing heavenly venerable seals at the same time. For him, even the Crimson Great Herb should be useless now, and as for a dimensional core, it had to be a transcendent level 1 at least, right? But there was only one transcendent dimension in the world. Hysteria was also one, but even thinking about it was a luxury. He couldn't destroy the profound negative realm, right? Firstly, Ling Han was unable to do it, and secondly, even if he could, there was no way he would. Hence, he could only depend on his own efforts. Perhaps it would take an epoch, or perhaps it would take even longer. Ling Han was also unsure. The further he progressed, the harder it would be to break through the barrier of his cultivation level. Hence, Ling Han planned to fully concentrate on deducing the heavenly venerable seals. This was the key to communicating with the fundamental particles. Perhaps he could deduce even more seals that could help him advance to the 6th tier? He went into seclusion repeatedly, but each time it was not for too long. He would come out once he deduced a single heavenly venerable seal, and reunite with the women. After all, he did not have many children, and the women also wanted a child with him. They had to work hard. 700 million years had passed, and an astonishing piece of news suddenly spread out. Chong Yen and the other 7th-tier ultimate elites of the last generation had withdrawn from the realm battlefield. Chapter 3024 3024 Going to Cause Trouble. Chapter 3024 3024 Going to Cause Trouble. 3024 Going to Cause Trouble. The 5 ultimate elites of 7th tier were giving up their responsibilities? When Ling Han found out about this, his first reaction was naturally disbelief. The survival of this Genesis world was related to every single person. So what if they were as strong as 7th tier? Without the heaven and earth and universe, even if they never died, so what? Moreover, it was extremely likely that Hysteria would possess the ability to kill 7th tiers after devouring the entire Genesis world. The destruction of the Genesis world from the last era had torn extermination into pieces, and the spirit of a 7th tier ultimate elite had been destroyed as well. Then, after engulfing the Genesis world, Hysteria would definitely possess this ability as well. How could 7th tiers be safe? How could Chong Yen and the others not have thought of this? They actually left the realm battlefield. Willfully. Wasn't this allowing Hysteria to advance even faster? Could it be that because Foam Wooding had died, they had given up on themselves because they thought that no one could deal with Hysteria? The possibility of this was too small. Being able to advance to the 7th tier, which of them wasn't a person with a firm willpower? As long as it was not yet the moment of true death, no matter how hopeless they would still fight to the end. Moreover, as long as the Genesis world wasn't destroyed, perhaps a true savior would emerge? This was far too strange. Ling Han couldn't accept this. Then, did the 5 ultimate elites have other plans? Had they joined Hysteria? This didn't seem like it. What benefits could there be from cooperating with hysteria? Moreover, if Chong Yen and the others had really leaned towards hysteria, they should have restrained Lin Luo and the others. Why had they only retreated out of the round battlefield? There was something strange about this. Ling Han pondered for a moment. The 5 ultimate elites had exited the round battlefield, so could hysteria's advance still be stopped? How was the situation in the main battlefield right now? If the main body of hysteria couldn't be stopped, and they merely relied on the profound negative realm's own power as resistance, then at most tens of thousands of years later, not even an epoch, the realm would definitely fall. This would also mean the death of the entire Genesis world. Ling Han's first reaction was to head to the main battlefield to battle hysteria, but he immediately dismissed this kind of impulse. He couldn't, he was still only a 5th-tier heavenly venerate. Without a true undying and indestructible body, wouldn't he just be going to the main battlefield to die? No matter what, he had to advance to the 6th tier and further improve his defense. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to withstand even a single blow from hysteria. That was practically a joke. But how was Ling Han supposed to advance into 6th tier as soon as possible? And since Chong Yen and his group had returned, shouldn't he go and play with them? Previously, it had been these 5 people that kept causing him trouble. Now, it should be his turn to take the initiative. Although he wasn't truly undying and indestructible now, only hysteria could penetrate his defenses. As for others, even 7th tiers would only be dumbfounded, and there was no reason for him to be afraid of them. Ling Han pondered for a moment before deciding to wait. If he just charged over like this, it would be the result of you being unable to wound me, and I would not be able to wound you either. At most, it would only be a verbal battle, and that would not be very interesting. But now that the 5 ultimate elites had returned, would they not establish their own force? Would they just stay on their lonesome? Ling Han did not believe that Chong Yen and the others would be so pure-minded with such scant desires. If that was really the case, then he could only accept it and seek them out for a fight. Thus, he sat down again, and waited to see if there would be any changes. After all, it was only a rumor that the 5 ultimate elites had withdrawn from the round battlefield. It hadn't been confirmed yet. Ling Han continued to deduce the heavenly venerable seals. As usual, every time he deduced a new seal, he would come out to walk around, move around, and communicate with the women. In a flash, 1,000,000 years had passed. It was no longer a rumor that the 5 ultimate elites had exited the round battlefield. Instead, it was a fact. This caused a commotion among the higher-ups. In fact, there were even some who expressed fear for their own safety. Some forces had already begun packing up and leaving. They were going to go through the passageway of the 2 realms, to the other end of the Genesis world. Then, even if hysteria really devoured the Genesis world, they would definitely be the last to die. Ling Han shook his head. Traversing between dimensions was no joke. There were some places where energy storms lay, and only those who were pseudo-heavenly venerable tiers or heavenly venerable tiers could pass through. Furthermore, there were countless dimensions, and it was unknown how long it would take to reach the other end. In any case, this was none of Ling Han's business. He had found out that Chong Yen and the others had indeed established their own respective places of enlightenment, and actually began taking disciples. This caused Ling Han to be at a loss. It wasn't like hysteria had been destroyed, and the world had become peaceful. So, why were Chong Yen and the others so relaxed? Had their heads been kicked by a donkey? They were actually establishing places of enlightenment and taking in disciples? Ling Han pondered for a moment before deciding to set off immediately to visit their places of enlightenment. Firstly, he wanted to see what was going on, and secondly, he wanted to know what the 5 of them were planning. There was something strange about this. Something very strange. After some thought, he decided to delay it for tens of thousands of years. That was because he had already deduced 110 6th-grade seals, and was only one away from deducing the whole set. Ling Han continued to cultivate in seclusion, communicating with the heaven and earth, connecting with the void, and grasping the power of life. Though he had only managed to grasp it superficially, the speed at which he deduced heavenly venerable seals was considerably faster now. Ling Han's mind continuously experienced enlightenment, as if it had been reborn. Another 30,000 years passed, and he came out of seclusion. Success. With a thought from him, the 111 sixth-grade seals were channeled, instantly increasing his power by 3,000 times. Ling Han entered into the void, and shot out a punch. Boom! The void trembled, and a vacuum as long as 5,000 kilometers was instantly created in the energy storm in front of him. After a long while, the energy storm started moving again, filling up this area. Chom Yen, Shatter Mountains, if the 5 of you don't master a few more first-grade seals, I'm afraid you can only be suppressed by me. When they found out that Ling Han was going to move, everyone was overjoyed, expressing their desire to go with him to play. Ling Han was rendered speechless. He was not going to play. The place of enlightenment of 5 ultimate elites was no place to play around in, right? However, it had really been a long time since he had brought everyone traveling with him. Forget it. He brought everyone with him, and took them all into the celestial guest residence. Then they set out. There was no need to rush. Every time they reached a new place, they would stop for a sightseeing tour. Thus, after 17 years, Ling Han finally arrived at the place of enlightenment of heavenly venerate Shatter Mountains. This place was called Shatter Mountains' Place of Enlightenment, but because it shared the same title as heavenly venerate Shatter Mountains, no one directly called the name of the Place of Enlightenment. They all referred to it simply as Place of Enlightenment. Ling Han settled everyone down at a very far location. If he began fighting with Shatter Mountains, who knew how much terrifying damage would be caused? He brought his disciples with him, as well as Little Qing, Small Rock, Rabbit, Old Ginseng, and the large black dog. This lineup could also be considered quite strange. If it was just this few people, he would be able to send them all away before the battle with Shattering Mountains began, and there was no need to worry that there would be any problems. Ayo, 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 Grandpa Dog is going to do something big. The large black dog stood on his hind legs like a human, his iron underwear reflecting cold light as he swayed back and forth. Grandpa Dog, please protect me. Rabbit grabbed onto the large black dog's thigh, and rubbed its head against the large black dog's iron underwear. Shoo, 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 or Grandpa Dog might want to eat a spicy rabbit's head. The large black dog swung its behind around. Grandpa Dog, do you want to piss? Why don't you just piss on the ground? The old ginseng wore a vulgar expression. The large black dog almost jumped up in anger. Why do you want me to pee? Could it be that you want to plant yourself in the ground to absorb nutrition? Get lost. Grandpa Dog doesn't want to pee. The old ginseng wore an astounded expression as he asked. A dog can't change its habit of peeing, right? The saying is a dog can't change its habit of eating poop. The golem corrected. Dumbly, it even boasted to the large black dog. Grandpa Dog, Big Rock is right, right. Chapter 3025 3025 Chapter 3027 The Idiot's Challenge. Chapter 3025 3025 Chapter 3027 The Idiot's Challenge. 3025 Chapter 3027 The Idiot's Challenge. What a bunch of idiots! The large black dog was so angry he wanted to bite someone's head off. Even though he was very vile and despicable, it seemed as though the rabbit and the old ginseng were not far behind. Get lost! He sent the rock golem flying with a kick. Fortunately, he didn't use too much strength. Else, the rock golem would have become a pile of rubble by now. Grandpa Dog, you are so cool and awesome. That kick was superb. The rabbit quickly hugged the large black dog's thigh and buttered him up. Go away. Don't dirty Grandpa Dog. Let little ginseng be the one to hug his thigh. The old ginseng excitedly approached. Get lost. You're the one who should get lost. The two idiots were at each other's throats, and had nothing but contempt for one another. It was quite the commotion. The rock golem made its way back. After having suffered the wrath of the large black dog, It had no choice but to crouch sadly by Ling Han's feet like a small puppy. Ling Han shook his head. These three were absolute idiots. Little Qing was better. It flew high in the sky with its wings, and didn't want to be associated with the three idiots. Hee hee! Chen Ruijing, Jian Yefeng, and the other disciples chuckled. Of the 8 disciples, only Fu Tianqing was absent. This was because his cultivation level was too high. Ling Han didn't want him to scare everyone off. Halt! Suddenly, someone stood before them and called out, "Identify yourselves!" The person before them was a celestial king. Even though there was only a single ribbon of iridescent light surrounding him, he was still a celestial king, someone who could be called an apex existence no matter where he went. However, he was actually just a guard here. What extravagance! But further thought would remind one that this was a 7th-tier heavenly venerate's place of enlightenment. As such, it was not so surprising for a celestial king to work as a guard. "We're here to issue a challenge!" The rabbit immediately hopped out. Yes, it indeed hopped out. Even its ears were perked up. What was going on? The celestial king was confused. A rabbit just came and said that it was here to issue a challenge? Ha! He broke out laughing. This was a 7th-tier heavenly venerate's place of enlightenment. A mere first heaven celestial king like you dared to say that you wanted to issue a challenge? It was hilarious. This was more than just overestimating one's own strength. It was the pinnacle of folly. "What's so funny?" the old ginseng barked. With a flick of its tendrils, it spat at that celestial king and said, "This is your grandpa ginseng's treasured fluid. Be thankful for the blessing, brat." Ling Han was speechless. Even after becoming a celestial king, this old ginseng was still as brash as before. Even if it were treasured fluid, that celestial king wouldn't tolerate such humiliation, let alone that it was just saliva. After all, it wasn't as if it was bestowed gracefully upon him. It was spat, and thus carried an intent to shame. That celestial king quickly dodged to the side. There was no facing such an attack directly. The old ginseng was ecstatic at the sight. Poo pu pu. It constantly spat at the celestial king, and its saliva rained down like a giant squall. That celestial king hastily released a shield of light and blocked all the spit. However, the old ginseng's saliva was not just an attempt to gross him out. It also carried a strong corrosion effect, which quickly broke down the shield of light. That celestial king was horrified. He never thought that not only was old ginseng a vile character, it also had actual skills. He had no choice but to take the matter seriously. Drawing upon the boundless regulations, he went head-on against the old ginseng. The old ginseng was laughing all the way as it continued to launch its attacks. It was not picky with its methods, and used all sorts of underhanded attacks. For example, it spat its saliva upwards in 3 directions, while its tendrils attacked downwards in another 3 directions. It was nothing short of vile and despicable. It was undoubtedly mentally exhausting to fight against a creature like this. That celestial king was soon yelling in fury, the veins on his forehead popping wildly. "You shouldn't come out to sully our eyes if you're so ugly. Even if you don't find it shameful, Grandpa Ginseng feels embarrassed for your mother's sake." The old ginseng was greatly influenced by the large black dog. Battle strength was not the only thing that could win fights, it had to have a skill in verbal assault as well. "Why don't you let Grandpa Ginseng give you a face wash and fix that ugly mug of yours with its treasured fluid?" That celestial king was on the verge of vomiting blood from anger. In his wrath, he utilized the regulations of heaven and earth and merged it with his own strength to form a halberd. He then hacked away at the old ginseng. "You ungrateful brat! How dare you try to fight back against your Grandpa Ginseng?" The old ginseng leapt up and said, "By fixing your face, Grandpa Ginseng becomes the parent of your renewed life. So now it's like you're trying to kill your own parent. Karma will come back to bite you. Grandpa Ginseng will not acknowledge a son like you anymore." That celestial king was completely enraged by the insults. It was as if he was shooting fire out of his eyes. He yelled and attacked even more vigorously. while his attacks had become more aggressive with rage, they were no longer as fluid as before. If the old ginseng had had a lower cultivation level than him, then he would have been able to win through this aggressive barrage of attacks. However, with both parties of equal strength, an attack like this would not net him any advantages. Instead, it gave him many openings and made his attacks easy to counter. The reason why the old ginseng was so talkative was precisely so that it could throw the enemy off balance and make him reveal an opening. Thus, it naturally wouldn't miss the opportunity now. Grabbing the opponent's weakness, it started pounding on him relentlessly. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Several figures suddenly appeared from the place of enlightenment and descended upon them. Each one of them had the strength of a celestial king. They didn't attack. Instead, they crossed their arms and coldly watched by the side. If the guard couldn't even beat someone like the old ginseng, how could he possibly have the gall to remain in the Shatter Mountain's place of enlightenment? Naturally, if the guard were to be defeated, the others would step in, defeat, and kill the old ginseng to restore the place of enlightenment's reputation. This was a holy ground. No one had the right to disrespect the prestige of the Shatter Mountain's place of enlightenment. After several hundred clashes, that celestial king was eventually defeated. He took a massive blow to the chest, and was vomiting blood endlessly. Sigh, it's so lonely to be unbeatable. The old ginseng was completely beside itself with delight. It looked very much like a person right now, with its tendrils wrapping around one another to form arms and legs. At the moment, it tucked its arms behind its back and shook its head. However, no one was supporting its banter, which made the situation a little awkward. Hey, why isn't anyone clapping? It asked. Paw, paw, paw. The large black dog and the rabbit clapped half-heartedly. They were just here to watch the commotion, and didn't care if things got serious. The old ginseng was suddenly happy again, puffing its chest out with an arrogant look on its face. Get lost, you pathetic weakling. It waved its hand dismissively at the celestial king. That celestial king had a livid expression on, but when he wanted to stand up for a rematch, someone sent him flying with a kick. It was a third heaven celestial king. He mocked. How embarrassing to not even be able to defeat an anomaly. What's that, brat? Did you grow your mouth on your asshole? The old ginseng stomped. Don't you know how to say nice words? Whom did you call an anomaly? You're the anomaly here. In fact, your whole face looks like an anomaly. That third heaven celestial king was taken aback. However, his surprise was soon replaced by anger. He had only said one thing, and it was the truth. He thought, you're just a celestial medicine that took on a different form. No, you didn't even take on a different form, just have the vague silhouette of a human being. What are you if not an anomaly? You have a very dirty mouth. He coldly said, and then struck at the old ginseng with his palm. Against the third heaven celestial king, the old ginseng would not be able to hold a candle. Save me. The sun is trying to kill his old man. The old ginseng immediately took off and ran towards Ling Han. The third heaven celestial king was furious. The sun was killing his old man? What a vile ginseng! Did it bathe its mouth in a sewer or something? He grunted angrily and focused regulations into the form of a sword, and then started slashing at the old ginseng. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.